Tonight, we're exploring the weirdest unsolved mysteries of the Pokémon world, from forgotten gods to the legends that time tried to erase. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine a world where history is not written in stone, but in the shifting shadows of a collective amnesia. We often view the Pokémon world through the lens of a bright, vibrant journey, a quest for badges, friendship, and discovery. But beneath the surface of the Pokédex entries and the cheerful music of the towns lies a landscape scarred by cataclysms that no one remembers, and gods who have been stripped of their names. There are holes in the timeline of this universe that shouldn't exist. Entire civilizations have vanished, leaving behind only cryptic ruins and silent, powerful guardians whose original purpose has been lost to the fog of millennia. We are told stories of heroes and kings. Yet when we look closer at the statues and the ancient tapestries, the faces have been scrubbed away, and the names have been replaced by titles of convenience. Why does the world forget the very beings that saved it from total annihilation? Think for a moment about the concept of a god in this world, them as powerful creatures to be caught and trained. But the lore suggests something far more haunting. There are entities that exist outside of time and space, beings that can rewrite reality with a thought, and yet they are often found slumbering in forgotten caves or sealed behind puzzles that no modern human can solve. There is a terrifying fragility to the divine in the Pokémon world. A king who ruled for 1,000 years became a ghost story told to children. A dragon that descended from the heavens to stop a global war can be erased from the history books of the very nation it protected, leaving only a distorted myth of a human ruler who never actually stood alone. This isn't just a lapse in record keeping. It feels like a deliberate suppression of the truth, a cosmic rewriting of the narrative to suit the needs of the present. The stakes of these mysteries are higher than simple curiosity. They suggest that the world is merely a thin veneer over a much older, much darker reality. When we speak of the darkest day, we aren't just talking about a storm. We're talking about a moment where the fabric of the world nearly tore apart, and the only reason we are here to talk about it is because of two legendary figures who were subsequently betrayed by the passage of time. If the world can forget the saviors of Galar, what else has it forgotten? What lies at the bottom of the great crater of Paldea? And why does the very earth there seem to hum with a power that defies the laws of biology? Why was a king granted immortality, only to be forced to wander the earth for 3,000 years, watching every civilization he knew crumble into dust? This is a world where the line between a miracle and a curse is razor thin. We find ourselves asking questions that the games often leave unanswered. Why did the Great Brass Tower burn? And why did the resurrection of 3 nameless Pokémon cause the legendary birds of the sky and the sea to flee from humanity forever? It wasn't just a fire. It was a breaking point in the relationship between the divine and the mortal. It again in the frozen peaks of the Crown Tundra, where a king of harvests sits on a wooden throne, his power fading because the people simply stopped believing he existed. In this world, faith is not just a feeling, it is a literal source of energy. When faith dies, the gods wither. When history is forgotten, the monsters of the past begin to stir in their seals. Tonight, we are going to look into these shadows. We will trace the footsteps of the Draconid people and their prayers to the stars. We will examine the tragic, eternal life of a giant who outlived his own kingdom. We will wonder about the strange, metallic worship of civilizations that vanished before the first Pokeball was ever crafted. We will explore why certain Pokémon were deemed so dangerous that they had to be bound to keystones or locked behind doors that require the strength of the earth itself to open. From the heights of the ozone layer to the crushing depths of the ocean floor, Pokémon World is a graveyard of secrets, and we're about to begin the long process of unearthing them. The journey ahead is a quiet one, a slow walk through the halls of forgotten palaces and the whispers of ancient forests. We aren't just looking for facts. We are looking for the feeling of what it means to live In a world where the ground beneath your feet might be a sleeping titan, and the stars above might be the eyes of a creature that watched the first dawn, close your eyes, settle into the stillness, and let the modern world fade away. We are traveling back, past the era of modern technology and organized leagues, into the era of myth, where the legends were real, and the gods still walked among us. There is a silence at the heart of the Pokémon world, a vast emptiness where history should be, but where instead we find only shadows, whispers, and the faint outlines of events, so monumental they should have shaped every generation to follow, and yet they are barely remembered. This is the first and most persistent mystery of all. The world itself seems to forget. We live in a reality where gods walk among us. Arceus, the original being, is said to have shaped the universe from nothing. Dialga controls time, Palkia bends space, and Giratina lingers in a dimension of antimatter. These are not distant myths. They can be encountered, captured, even befriended. And yet, ask any ordinary person in the Pokémon world about their origins, and you will receive a blank stare. The ancient civilizations that worshipped these beings have crumbled into dust, their temples overgrown, their scriptures lost. The history of this world is not just incomplete, it is actively fractured, as if something or someone has been deliberately erasing the past. Consider the paradox. At any moment, a legendary Pokémon could fly overhead, and most humans would not even recognize it. The technology exists to record, to preserve, but the records are riddled with gaps. Wars are fought, cities burn, entire eras of worship vanish without a trace. Why? What causes a civilization to forget the very gods it once prayed to every day? Is it time? Is it willful ignorance? Or is there a deeper force at work, something that pulls the threads of history taut until they snap? Tonight we are beginning a journey through these gaps, a 4.5-hour expedition into the deepest anomalies of the timeline, the places where the narrative breaks down, and the secrets that the world has tried to bury. This is not a simple retelling of Pokémon lore. This is an investigation into what has been forgotten and why. Because the silence of the ages is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of things that were once known, and then deliberately or accidentally erased. We will start with the broad strokes, the pattern that connects all these mysteries. From the darkest day to the tragedy of King Azed, from the fire that consumed the Brass Tower to the prayers that awakened Rayquaza, the same theme repeats. Human beings forget, and Pokémon suffer the consequences. Calyrex, once the king of Galar, lost its power when people stopped believing. Zacian and Zamazenta saved an entire region and were struck from the record as if they had never existed. The Draconid tribe prayed for centuries, and now their knowledge survives only in fragments. Even Arceus itself, the creator, has become a shadow in the minds of modern trainers. This is the paradox I mentioned. The gods are real, but their origins are shrouded. Their deeds are documented in stones and tablets, but the living memory has been cut. The Pokémon world is a place of immense wonder, and yet it is also a place where the truth is always just out of reach. Every answer leads to another question. Every legend points to a deeper, older legend that has already begun to fade. So let us listen to the silence. Let us piece together the fragments that remain, and let us begin with the greatest act of erasure in the history of this world. An event so catastrophic that it was not just forgotten, but deliberately rewritten. An event that took place 3,000 years ago, when the sky turned black and two heroes were erased from history so completely that even their names are now unknown. That story waits for us in the next chapter. But first, we must understand why the silence exists at all. The previous chapter left us standing at the edge of a vast shadow, a silence that stretches across the known history of the Pokémon world. We spoke of fragments, gods whose names have faded, civilizations whose monuments have crumbled into myth. But there is one silence so deliberate, so thorough, that it feels less like forgetfulness and more like an erasure. It is the story of a day that should have ended everything, and the heroes who were never allowed to be remembered. 3,000 years ago, the region we now call Galar was a very different place. The land was wilder, the energy beneath the soil thrumming with something ancient and unstable. And then, from the heart of a primordial darkness, a storm was born. Not a storm of rain or wind, but a storm of pure black energy. It rose from the ground like a living wound, spreading tendrils of shadow, that swallowed the sky from horizon to horizon. This was the darkest day. The source of this calamity was Eternatus, a Pokémon unlike any other. It had arrived on this world in a meteor long before humans walked the land, and it had been slumbering beneath what would become the Galar region. But something awakened it, perhaps the gradual accumulation of human ambition or the accidental release of its own dormant power. When Eternatus emerged, it ascended to its Eternamax form, a colossal skeletal dragon of pure spiraling energy, and as it rose, it pulled the very fabric of the world apart. Every Pokémon within miles began to glow with a terrifying, unnatural light. They grew to enormous sizes, their forms twisting and distorting. Buildings were crushed under the weight of rampaging Gigantamax Pokémon. The once green fields of Galar turned to ash beneath the Black Storm. This was not a war between two factions. This was an extinction event unfolding in real time. But in the chaos, two figures emerged. They were not kings. They were not generals. They were two young humans whose names have been lost to history. And by their side ran two wolves. One was a blade of steel and fairy light, a warrior whose fangs could cut through the very concept of darkness. The other was a shield of iron and fighting spirit, a guardian whose fur could turn back the tide of any attack. Their names, of course, were Zacian and Zamazenta. These four, the two youths and the two wolves, stood against Eternatus at the heart of the storm. The battle must have been unimaginable. The black energy of Eternamax, Eternatus clawed at them like a living void, but the wolves moved in perfect harmony. Zacian struck with a sword forged from its own soul, and Zamazenta deflected blasts that would have leveled mountains. Together, they drove Eternatus back into the ground, sealing it deep beneath the earth. The black storm dissolved, and the Dynamax energy receded. The day was saved, and then the erasure began. The two youths were crowned as kings. They were celebrated, their names etched into the founding legends of Galar, but Zacian and Zamazenta, they were systematically scrubbed from the official record. The story was rewritten to feature a single heroic monarch, not two. The wolves were reduced to mere symbols, statues in a city square, their true deeds forgotten. Why? Why would a civilization go out of its way to erase the Pokémon that saved them? The answers are buried in the politics of power. Perhaps the new kings, fearing the primal strength of the wolves, decided that the people must never know that their salvation came not from human hands, but from Pokémon. Perhaps they wanted the glory for themselves, to consolidate their rule. Or perhaps there was a darker reason, a fear. If the wolves were remembered, someone might try to summon them again, or worse, awaken the creature they had sealed. The official history of Galar became a lie, a carefully curated narrative designed to suppress the truth, but the truth as a way of seeping through the cracks. The people who lived through the darkest day knew what they saw. Stories of the two wolves were passed down as folk tales, whispered in rural villages long after the royal chronicles were rewritten. And today, in the modern era, we have found the artifacts, the tapestries, the fragments of song that speak of Zacian and Zamazenta. The wolves were never truly forgotten. They were merely suppressed. This brings us to the doorstep of another mystery, one that lies just ahead. For if the darkest day was erased to protect the legacy of a single king, then what else was hidden? What happened to the other heroes? What happened to the one who rode a loyal steed and brought prosperity to the land, only to be forgotten when faith faltered? That story awaits us in the next chapter, when we uncover the truth about the kings of Galar and the stolen glory. The darkest day ended with the two great wolves, Zacian and Zamazenta, collapsing from exhaustion as the black storm withdrew into Eternatus's wounded form. The two human youths stood victorious over the battlefield. History remembers them as heroes. History remembers them as kings. But history, as we are learning, is a liar that wears the mask of truth. When the sky finally cleared over Galar, the people emerged from shelters to find their world transformed. The black clouds had vanished, but the scars of mass Dynamaxing remained. Craters in the earth, trees twisted into grotesque statues of wood and light, and a lingering sense that something vast and terrible had been forestalled. The two youths, names now lost to time but not to legend, were hailed instantly. They were the ones who had faced the darkness. They were the ones who had commanded the battle, and they were the ones who returned with a story that would become scripture. But there is a silence at the heart of that narrative, a deliberate, calculated omission. For the two youths claimed sole credit for stopping the darkest day. They spoke of strategy, of courage, of a bond between human and Pokémon that had somehow channeled the power of ancient beasts. But they never mentioned the wolves. They never spoke of the sword and the shield that have fought alongside them. They never acknowledged, without Cessation and Zamazenta, the storm would have swallowed Galar whole. Why? The simplest answer is power. The two youths were ordinary humans before that day. After it, they became rulers. They were crowned kings of Galar, their names etched into stone monuments, their faces stamped onto coins. But if the truth had been told, if the world had known that two Pokémon had done the real work of stopping Eternatus, then the glory would have been divided, and division meant vulnerability. A single ruler, the myth says, is the architect of all victory. So the wolves were erased from the official record, their existence relegated to fading whispers and ancient tapestries that no one knew how to read. The distortion of history into the myth of a single human ruler took generations to solidify. First, the two youths were remembered as a pair, the twin kings, brothers in arms. Then, over centuries, the stories merged. The brothers became one figure, a composite king who wielded both a sword and a shield, a single ruler whose name was passed down as a solitary savior. The two wolves became symbols, badges on armor, shadows on a mural, but their true identity as living, breathing, thinking beings was erased. The king of Galar, the legend says, defeated the darkest day with the help of two loyal Pokémon. Not heroes, not partners, but tools. And so the creatures who had saved an entire region were reduced to footnotes in their own war. This is not merely an error in record keeping. This is a crime against memory. The psychological impact of collective amnesia on a region's cultural identity cannot be overstated. Galar today is a region obsessed with spectacle, with stadium battles, with championship titles, with the roar of crowds. But beneath that glittering surface lies a deep, unspoken wound. The people of Galar do not know that they have forgotten something essential. They do not know that their history was rewritten by ambition. The truth of the wolves lives only in a small museum in dusty papers and a preserved fragment of the sword of the hero, until recent events brought it back to light. For 3,000 years, a civilization was built on a lie. What does it do to a people to believe that only a human can save them? What does it do to their sense of self when they learn that the real saviors were beings they have been taught to command? The answer is a kind of sacred vertigo, a falling into oneself where the ground of history gives way. The two youths, whose names are still debated by scholars, may have believed their lie was necessary. They may have believed that only a human king could unite Galar, but that decision, made in a moment of triumph, created a chain of forgetting that severed the region from its deepest truth. That survival had always been a partnership, and so the kings sat on their thrones, and the wolves vanished into legend, and the darkest day became a story told to children, a story with a single hero, a single sword, a single moment of triumph. But if you look closely at the tapestries that still hang in ancient towers, you can see the wolves. They are always there, just outside the frame, their eyes watching the crowned figure with a patience that is almost sad. They know that glory is a borrowed thing. They know that the truth will always find a way to howl against the silence. As we leave the shores of Galar, our journey carries us eastward, across the sea to a continent, where another king once stood beneath a sky that wept with sorrow. And that ruler did not forget his partners. He remembered them for 3,000 years alone. The story of AZ and the ultimate weapon is a tale of a different kind of loss, one where the bond was not erased, but broken by an act of terrible love. And that is where we must go next. And so the story of Galar's stolen glory leaves us with a bitter aftertaste. How easily truth can be twisted when power and legacy are at stake. But what happens when that twist comes not from ambition, but from grief? What happens when a king, broken by loss, builds a miracle with his own hands, only to watch that miracle become a curse that echoes across 3,000 years? This is the story of AZ, the forgotten monarch of ancient Kalos, and the weapon that was never meant to be a weapon at all. The Kalos War was not like the conflicts we read about in textbooks. It was a war of attrition, of blood and fire, where Pokémon and humans fought side by side in trenches carved from the earth itself. King AZ ruled over a kingdom that was once the jewel of the region, but war spares no crown. It was during this war that AZ's most cherished companion, a small, gentle Floette, fell in battle. She was not a warrior by nature. She was a caretaker, a symbol of hope. And when she died in his arms, the king's heart turned to ash. But AZ was not an ordinary king. He was a builder, a visionary, a man who believed that love could rewrite the laws of nature. In his grief, he gathered the greatest minds of his era, engineers, scientists, mystics, and set them to work on something impossible. They called it the ultimate weapon. But in the beginning, it was called simply the machine. The machine was fueled by infinity energy, the same life force that flows through every living Pokémon. It was raw, untapped, dangerous beyond measure. AZ did not care. He poured his kingdom's resources, his people's labor, and his own soul into its construction. Tunnels were carved beneath the earth. Crystals were mined from deep caverns. And at the heart of it all, a core of pure energy began to pulse like a second heartbeat. When the machine was complete, AZ placed the body of his Floette into its chamber. He activated the mechanism. A beam of light shot skyward, a pillar of radiance that tore through the clouds and shook the very foundations of the continent. For one agonizing moment, everything went silent. And then Floette opened her eyes. Resurrection. True, impossible resurrection. The king wept as he held her, both of them now bound to the machine, both of them granted eternal life. For a brief golden moment, the world seemed to have been set right. But war does not end just because one king has found peace. The conflict raged on, and as AZ watched more lives, more Pokémon, more Floettes, be consumed by the flames, something inside him twisted. If the machine could bring life back, could it not also take it away? If infinity energy could heal one broken heart, could it not end every war in a single final stroke? He turned the machine toward the battlefield. The moment of corruption was not a sudden snap. It was a slow, deliberate decision made from the deepest well of despair. AZ recalibrated the weapon. He redirected its power from resurrection to annihilation. And when he fired it, the beam that had once glowed with golden light turned black as charred bone. The weapon swept across the warring armies, human, Pokémon, ally, enemy, and erased them from existence. Thousands vanished in an instant. The war ended, but so did everything else. The land was scarred. The sky wept ash, and Floette, the one he had done all of this for, looked at him with eyes that held no love. She saw what he had become. She saw the monster masked in grief, and she left. Without a word, without a goodbye, she simply vanished into the ruins, leaving AZ alone with his eternal, hollow life. He wandered for centuries, millennia. He saw empires rise and fall. He saw the darkest day from a distance, watching Zacian and Zamazenta fight a battle no one would remember. He saw the brass tower burn and Ho-Oh descend. He saw worlds change, and he remained unchanged, a ghost in a king's body, haunted by the machine he had built. That machine still exists, buried beneath the soil of Kalos, dormant but not dead. Its energy hums in the stones, in the air, in the very earth. And as tall, gaunt ancient still walks among us waiting. Waiting for what? Perhaps for forgiveness. Perhaps for a second chance. Or perhaps he knows that some tools can never be unmade, only forgotten. But forgetting is a luxury he has never been granted. And as we ponder the weight of an eternal life that began as a gift and became a prison, we have to ask, what happens when the one who built the weapon is the only one left to remember its true purpose? That question leads us to a place few dare to tread, the burden of immortality, and whether it is a blessing or a curse that lasts far longer than any war. When the ultimate weapon was finally deactivated, and the war that had cost so many lives came to its bitter end, AZ did not die. He did not age. He did not even sleep the long, dreamless sleep of a king who has lost everything. Instead, he remained immortal, cursed with a body that would not decay, a heart that would not cease its aching, and a height that set him apart from every other human who had ever lived. You see, the same infinity energy that had resurrected his Floette had done something far more terrible to him. It had made him permanent. 3,000 years have passed since that day, and AZ has spent every single one of them walking the earth as a giant among men, not a conqueror, not a hero, just a solitary figure towering over villages and cities, watching as empires rose and crumbled, as languages shifted and were forgotten, as the very face of the world changed around him, and yet he remained exactly the same. Imagine for a moment what that must feel like. You have seen every catastrophe that has befallen this world. You have stood on the same ground where the darkest day once blackened the skies of Galar 3,000 years ago, and you were there, not as a participant perhaps, but as a witness. We know from the fragmented records of that ancient storm that two trainers rose alongside the legendary wolves, Zacian and Zamazenta, to quell the Eternatus crisis. But what if they were not the only ones who saw it? What if at the edge of that howling darkness, a lonely giant stood watching, his face illuminated by the raging energies of Dynamax? The evidence is subtle, but it is there. In the ruins of old Galar, before the region's history was rewritten, there are carvings of a towering man with a sorrowful expression, standing among the clouds of the darkest day. Historians dismiss it as artistic exaggeration, but we know better. AZ is real, and his timeline aligns perfectly with that event. He was not from Galar, but he wandered there. He saw the storm. He saw the heroes, the ones history would later erase, and he kept walking. That is the philosophical horror of living through every major catastrophe in human history. Not just the grand disasters like the darkest day, but the smaller personal tragedies that accumulate over millennia. Every friend he ever made has turned to dust. Every city he loved has become a ruin. Every war, every famine, every plague. He has walked through them all, unable to intervene, unable to die, unable to forget. His Floette abandoned him because she could not bear to see what he had become. And yet he continues. He wanders. He waits. For what? For redemption? For an end? The truth is, we do not know if his immortality has any limits. Perhaps one day he will simply stop, or perhaps he will still be walking when the final star in the sky burns out. But before that distant end, there is another catastrophe that looms in our understanding of this world. One that took place much closer to our own era. It involved a tower, a bolt of lightning, and a legendary phoenix who chose to give life back to the dead. And its consequences are still felt today in the very wilds of Johto. That story is known as the burning of the Brass Tower, and so we leave AZ wandering the earth, a giant among mortals, cursed with immortality and the weight of a weapon that reshaped the world. His story is a reminder that some sins cannot be buried. They echo through millennia. But AZ is not alone in bearing witness to catastrophe. There is another fire, smaller in scale, but no less significant, that burned through the soul of a city and changed the relationship between humanity and the divine forever. This is the story of the Brass Tower, a tragedy that unfolds not in a forgotten war, but in a single night of thunder and flame in the ancient city of Ekritique. 150 years ago, Ekritique City stood as a living monument to a time when humans and legendary Pokémon walked side by side. Two towers rose above the landscape, each a testament to that bond. The Tin Tower to the west, where Ho-Oh once roosted in radiant splendor, and the Brass Tower to the east, a place of equal reverence. The city breathed the presence of these immortal beings. People said that on clear nights, Ho-Oh's wings painted the sky in rainbows, and Lugia's shadow fell over the sea like a gentle hand. But that era was about to end in smoke and ash. The 150-year-old tragedy in Ekritique City, where lightning ignited the sky, began as a storm. Not an unusual storm for the region. The Johto coast is known for sudden squalls, and thunder rolls off the mountains like a drum. But that night, the storm was different. The clouds gathered low and heavy, pressing against the rooftops, and the air grew thick with static. The residents of Ekritique knew the signs. They had seen lightning strike the towers before, but the Brass Tower was built to withstand such fury. It had stood for generations, its brass fittings gleaming even in the dark. No one expected what came next. A single bolt, brighter than any they had ever witnessed, pierced the storm and struck the spire of the brass tower. The strike was not just fire. It was a lance of pure energy that seemed to split the heavens. The tower, saturated with moisture and age, did not simply catch flame, it ignited. Within minutes, the upper floors were engulfed, and the brass that gave the tower its name began to melt, dripping like molten tears into the courtyard below. The townspeople rushed to help, but the fire was too fierce, the heat too intense. They could only watch as the symbol of their connection to the divine crumbled from within, and inside that collapsing structure, 3 Pokémon were trapped. Their names were never recorded. We do not know what species they were, whether they were wild or companion animals kept in the tower's lower chambers, or whether they were the guardians of the shrine. The historical chronicles mention only that 3 souls, nameless, faceless, perished in the inferno. They burned alongside the tower, their cries lost in the roar of the flames. Some say the fire consumed them so completely that not even ash remained to mark their passing. For the people of Ekritik, this was not just a tragedy of property or pride. It was a sign, a terrible omen that spoke to something deeper. Why did the townspeople view the fire not as an accident, but as a judgment on humanity? The answer lies in the relationship they had with Ho-Oh and Lugia. Both legendary Pokémon had been present in Ekritik for centuries, but their presence was conditional. They remained because the people were worthy, because the city upheld harmony between humans and Pokémon, between ambition and humility. But over time, the city had grown proud. The towers became symbols of human achievement, not divine grace. The brass gleamed with the pride of craftsmanship, and the incense burned with the arrogance of ownership. The lightning strike was seen as a correction, a punishment for forgetting that Ho-Oh and Lugia were not guests to be housed, but gods to be honoured. When 3 innocent lives were taken in the very temple of their power, the message was unmistakable. Humanity had failed the test. The fire burned for days. When it finally died, the brass tower was a charred skeleton, its heart hollowed out. No one dared rebuild. The site became sacred ground, a place of mourning and reflection. Children were told stories of the night. The sky turned to gold, and the tower wept brass. And in that silence, the people waited for a sign that the divine had not abandoned them entirely. As we turned toward what happened next, the moment when Ho-Oh descended from somewhere beyond the storm to reclaim what was lost, we approached the most extraordinary chapter in this forgotten history. The resurrection of 3 nameless flames into the bodies of legendary beasts would change the fate of Johto forever. But before we follow the rainbow, we must understand what was born from the ashes. That story awaits in the next chapter, Ho-Oh's divine resurrection. The brass tower had stood for centuries as a monument to human devotion, a great bell-shaped spire that reached toward the sky like a prayer made of wood and stone. But on that night, lightning turned it into a funeral pyre. 3 Pokémon, trapped inside, perished before anyone could reach them. Their names were never recorded, their forms never described, their eyes never seen by history. And as the flames died down and the ash settled over Ekritik City, the people wept for what they had lost. But something else was watching from beyond the clouds. It descended not in fire, but in a spectrum of light that seemed to rewrite the meaning of colour itself. 7 feathers, each a different hue, trailed behind a great avian shape whose wings shimmered like stained glass alive with an inner sun. This was Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon, guardian of the skies, the keeper of the ability to resurrect the departed. It had not been seen by human eyes in generations, and yet here it came, drawn by the tragedy below. Its cry was not a screech of anger, but a song that resonated with the very frequencies of healing and rebirth. The people of Ekritik watched in awe as Ho-Oh circled the smoking ruin, its feathers scattering light that refracted through the lingering smoke and painted the night sky in bands of crimson, gold, emerald and sapphire. Then, with a deliberate grace, it descended upon the ashes. The three bodies, broken and charred, lay among the debris, but Ho-Oh did not mourn them. It breathed life into them. Not just a simple resurrection, but a transformation so complete that it would forever change the balance of nature. From that pyre rose three beings that had never before walked the earth. The first emerged from a pile of embers, its body wreathed in a flowing mane of magma, its roar the sound of a volcano awakening. This was Entei, the embodiment of fire's most volatile and passionate nature, a creature whose very presence could melt stone and boil rivers. The second tore through a cloud of smoke, its sleek yellow fur crackling with static, its eyes flashing with the fury of a storm that had been bottled up for centuries. This was Raikou, the lightning that strikes without warning, the thunder that rolls across the plains, the electricity that dances between heaven and earth. The third stepped forth from a pool of water that had collected from the extinguishing effort, its body sleek and blue like a glacier's heart, its tail flowing like a gentle stream. This was Suicune, the eternal rain, the north wind that cools the scorched land, the purifier that travels the world to restore what fire and destruction have tarnished. Together, they became known as the legendary beasts. Though they were not beasts in the way of ordinary creatures, they were elemental forces given flesh, each one assigned a domain that mirrored the manner of their death. Entei, born of the flame that consumed them. Raikou, born of the lightning that struck the tower. Suicune, born of the water that tried in vain to save them. Ho-Oh had not simply resurrected the three nameless Pokémon. It had remade them into archetypes, living symbols of the tragedy that had unfolded. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, Ho-Oh departed, flying westward, never to return to that place again. But a question lingers in the shadows of that story, one that no historian, no researcher, no Pokédex entry has ever answered. What were those three Pokémon before they died? Were they common species, ordinary lives snuffed out by accident, chosen at random for a divine experiment? Or were they something more? Perhaps Pokémon of great power and significance, whose destruction demanded a rebirth of equal magnitude. Some speculate they were the original forms of the beasts themselves, evolved or transformed into something entirely new. Others whisper that they were actually human souls, punished by fate before being given a second chance as guardians. The truth is not recorded anywhere. It is a gap in the lore that the Pokémon world refuses to fill, a silence that makes the story all the more haunting. Why did Ho-Oh choose to resurrect only those three? There were other Pokémon in the tower that night, other lives lost, but only three were singled out. Perhaps it was because their spirits were pure, or because their suffering was the greatest. Or perhaps Ho-Oh had been watching Ekrik for a long time, waiting for a moment to remind humanity that even in the depths of loss, there could be a rebirth so profound that it changes the world forever. The resurrection was not just a miracle, it was a warning. Ho-Oh and its counterpart, Lugia, had long been guardians of the balance between land and sea, between the burn and the breeze. The brass towers burning was, in their eyes, a symptom of human arrogance. And so Ho-Oh gave life to three avatars of the natural forces that humans had tried to control. And then it vanished, leaving the people of Johto to interpret the lesson on their own. That lesson would fracture the very foundations of Johto's spiritual traditions. The people who had worshipped the towers, the birds, would soon find themselves divided, their beliefs splintering into two opposing camps, each claiming to know the true meaning of the rainbow's message. It is a rift that would widen over the centuries, leading to what later generations would call the Great Schism of Johto, a story that is waiting for us in the quiet darkness of the next chapter. And so Ho-Oh descended upon the smouldering ruins of Brass Tower, and with a flash of rainbow light, 3 souls rose from the ashes. Entei, Raikou, and Suicune were born not just of fire and lightning and rain, but of grief. They were a testament to what had been lost and what could be restored. The people of Ecruteak watched from a distance, their hearts torn between awe and shame. They had prayed for deliverance, and the rainbow Pokémon had answered. But the answer was not a return to grace, it was a farewell. For in the very moment Ho-Oh resurrected the 3 nameless Pokémon, something shifted in the heavens. The city that had once been a sacred meeting place for the divine birds became a monument to human failure. The people had built the Twin Towers to honour Ho-Oh and Lugia, but they had also built a city of greed, of neglect, of carelessness. The fire that consumed Brass Tower was not an act of nature alone. It was lightning, yes, but it found its fuel in a broken town that had long stopped tending to its own gods. And the gods noticed. This is the great mystery that surrounds the schism of Johto. Why did Ho-Oh and Lugia, who had for centuries watched over the humans of Ecruteak, choose to abandon them after the fire? The answer lies not in the flames themselves, but in what the flames revealed. The tower had stood for generations as a beacon of faith, a place where the boundary between man and legend was thin. But when lightning struck and the structure began to collapse, no one could save the 3 Pokémon trapped inside. Not the priests, not the elders, not the strongest trainers. The people could not even save their own companions. And in that failure, Ho-Oh saw something unbearable. It was not that the humans were evil, it was that they were indifferent. They had grown complacent, treating the towers as monuments rather than living contracts. The fire exposed a deep rift. The people had stopped truly believing. They attended rituals by rote. They offered prayers without heart, and they let the sacred grounds fall into disrepair. The fire was a judgment not of malice, but of neglect. And when Ho-Oh lifted the 3 resurrected beasts from the ash, it did not turn to face the gathered crowd. It simply flew away toward the western sea, leaving Lugia behind for a time. But Lugia too soon withdrew. The guardian of the seas had watched the fire from the depths of the Whirl Islands. And when it learned of the schism, it understood what Ho-Oh had seen. The trust between human and divine was broken. The people of Ecruteak begged for the birds to return, but their pleas were hollow echoes of a faith that had already died. The bond had been forged in ancient times, when humanity was small and humble before the forces of nature. Now, with civilization growing, with technology and knowledge replacing wonder, the gods had become obsolete, and so they chose to fade. But they did not leave the world entirely. Before departing, Ho-Oh gave the resurrected beasts a final task. Entei, Raikou, and Suicune were not just revived, they were transformed into eternal observers, bound to roam Johto forever. They were given the ability to sense the hearts of humans, to witness every act of kindness and every moment of cruelty. But they were forbidden from intervening directly. They could no longer join humanity, because that bridge had been burned, quite literally, in the fire of Brass Tower. Instead, they became living monuments, reminders of what the gods had once given, and what humanity had thrown away. So Entei races across volcanic plains, its roar echoing the pain of a lost connection. Raikou dashes through thunderstorms, lightning crackling around its mane, a symbol of the blaze that ended everything. Suicune walks softly beside clean waters, purifying the world but never purifying the hearts of those who caused the schism. They are perpetual observers, forever watching a species they once loved but can no longer touch, and they see everything. They see the children of Ekritik grow up telling stories of the rainbow bird that never returns. They see the towers rebuilt as tourist attractions, hollow shells of their former sacred purpose. They see faith become folklore. The great question lingers across the ages. Could the schism ever be healed? Could Ho-Oh and Lugia ever return to human civilization? The legends say that if a trainer of pure heart were to call them, the birds might answer. But that condition is nearly impossible. For how can any human prove a pure heart after the fire proved the impurity of all? The beasts run and they wait. They watch and they remember. And every so often, a traveller in the deep forests of Yoto catches a glimpse of a rainbow feather or a shadow over the sea. But it is never a promise, only a whisper of what was. And as we turn our gaze from the smouldering towers of Ekritik, we find ourselves drawn to another ancient conflict, one that rages not between gods and humans, but between the primal forces of the earth and the sea, a battle that has no witnesses, no observers, only the endless cycle of destruction and renewal. That is the story we will uncover in the next chapter, when we explore the primal conflict of Hoenn, where the ground shakes and the oceans rise, and where a single dragon in the sky holds the fate of both worlds in its claws. The previous chapter ended with Ho-Oh and Lugia turning their backs on human civilization, a wound that still echoes through the legends of Yoto. But in another corner of the world, far from the burned tower and the poisoned trust, an older war was being waged, a war that had no beginning and it seemed no end, a war fought not with fire and lightning, but with the very bones of the planet. This was the primal conflict of Hoenn. Deep beneath the crust of the earth, in the molten heart of the continent, there slumbered a creature of immense gravity and volcanic fury. Its name was Groudon, the continent Pokémon, and in the deepest trenches of the ocean, where sunlight never reaches and pressure crushes stone into sand, there dreamed a being of endless rain and rising tides. Its name was Kyogre, the sea basin Pokémon. For eons, these two slept, locked in a dormant stalemate. Their very existence was a tension held in check by the world's own equilibrium. But every so often, something would disturb that balance. A shift in tectonic plates, a change in ocean currents, a whisper of ancient conflict carried through the earth itself. And then they would wake. When Groudon stirred, the continents expanded. Great land masses rose from the seafloor, pushing upward with a groan so deep it could be felt in the bones of every living thing. Volcanoes erupted along the new coastlines, spewing ash and lava that cooled into fresh rock. The world grew drier, hotter, more solid. Deserts spread, rivers shrank, trees withered under a sky that seemed to hold its breath. And as Groudon rose, so too did Kyogre answer. The ocean responded by swelling, by storming, by reclaiming what the land had taken. Tidal waves, the height of mountains, crashed against the newborn shores. Rain fell for weeks without pause, drowning the plains, flooding the cities that dared to settle too close to the sea. The sky turned black with clouds that never parted. The only light came from lightning that split the horizon. Again and again and again. This was not a battle in the way we think of battles. There were no trainers, no moves, no strategy. This was a war of elements, a contest of will between two forces that defined the very shape of the planet. Every movement they made had consequences measured in miles and millennia. The endless geological war between Groudon's expanding continents and Kyogre's rising seas was not a conflict that could be won by a single blow. It was a grinding, relentless, eternal struggle. And caught between these two titans were all the creatures of Hoenn, human and Pokémon alike, who had no choice but to weather the storm or flee the drought. The ecological stakes of a world caught between absolute drought and total deluge were catastrophic. Entire ecosystems ceased to exist within a single season. Forests that had stood for 1,000 years turned to tinder and then to ash. Coral reefs that had grown for even longer were bleached white by the retreating sea, then crushed by the advancing land. Pokémon that had evolved for specific climates found themselves stranded in environments that no longer supported them. The water types of the inland lakes watched their homes dry into cracked mud. The ground types of the high plateaus watched their ranges sink beneath the surf. And the humans, scattered across the region, could only watch the sky and wonder which calamity would claim them first. Some prayed to the land, offering sacrifices of earth and stone to appease Groudon. Others cast offerings of shell and pearl into the ocean, begging Kyogre to relent. But the war was not listening to prayers. It was listening only to itself. And then from a place far above the clouds, something else began to stir. The ozone layer, that thin shield of gas that protects the world from the sun's harshest rays, had long been the domain of a third being, a dragon of emerald and gold, with eyes that could pierce the veil of the atmosphere. Rayquaza, the sky Pokémon, had not descended to the surface of the planet in millions of years. It had no interest in the affairs of land or sea. Its home was the boundary between Earth and space, a realm of thin air and endless blue. But when the conflict between Groudon and Kyogre grew so intense that the very climate of the planet began to tear apart, Rayquaza could feel it. The disturbance rippled upward through the atmosphere, a turbulence that even the highest winds could not calm. And so, for the first time in recorded memory, Rayquaza descended. The dragon carved a path through the clouds, its body cutting the sky like a blade of light. It descended not to take sides, not to judge which titan was right or wrong, but to enforce a peace that neither could resist. The first recorded descent of Rayquaza from the ozone layer to enforce peace was a moment that would echo through Hoenn's history for generations. When Rayquaza arrived, the battle ceased, not because Groudon and Kyogre were afraid, but because the dragon's presence was so overwhelming, so absolute, that the very concept of conflict seemed to dissolve in its wake. Groudon retreated into the deepest magma chambers, sealing itself beneath miles of rock. Kyogre sank into the abyssal plains, its storms dissipating into gentle rain, and Rayquaza, having done what it came to do, rose back into the sky and returned to its vigil above the world. But the peace was not permanent. It never is. The primal forces that drive Groudon and Kyogre are not things that can be reasoned with or permanently subdued. They are the ancient heartbeat of the planet itself. And every few centuries, that heartbeat quickens. The conflict resumes. The land rises. The sea swells. And once again, the world waits for the sky dragon to return. Yet there is another layer to this story, one that involves not just the titans, but the people who lived in their shadow, a tribe of humans who learned to read the signs of the coming war, who built their lives around the hope that Rayquaza would answer their call. They called themselves the Draconid people, and they dwelled in the caverns of Meteor Falls, where the first megastones had fallen from the heavens like tears from the sky. Their prayers, their rituals, their very existence became entwined with the legend of Rayquaza, and it would be their faith that centuries later would enable something that had never been seen before, a transformation that would change the meaning of power itself. But that is a story for our next chapter. The endless geological war between Groudon's expanding continents and Kyogre's rising seas was never meant to be a stalemate. It was a cycle of violence that threatened to tear the world apart, again and again, until something finally broke the pattern, and that something came from an unlikely source. A small, isolated tribe of humans living deep within the caverns of Meteor Falls. Those caves, carved into a mountain range in the Hoenn region, more than just a network of underground rivers and stalactites. Long before any modern explorer set foot there, the Draconid tribe called those halls home. They were masters of dragon-type Pokémon, but their true devotion was written in the stars. The Draconids believed that the heavens held not just light, but answers. They watched the constellations shift, charted the paths of comets, and whispered prayers to the sky. They were a people of faith and observation, their entire existence intertwined with what lay above. But one night, something fell from those stars. A shower of meteorites, blazing through the atmosphere, scattered across their territory. The Draconids gathered the fragments, marveling at the strange, luminous stones embedded within. They did not know it then, but these were the first megastones to ever touch the Earth, and they were not random debris. They were a signal, a catalyst, a gift from the cosmos, or perhaps a warning. As the centuries passed, the Draconids learned to shape these stones, to attune them to the energy of their Pokémon. They discovered that the stones resonated with a specific frequency, one that could only be unlocked by a deep, spiritual bond. But the true purpose of these stones remained dormant, waiting for a moment of crisis. That moment arrived when Groudon and Kyogre rose again, their awakening shaking the very foundations of Hoenn. The land split, the seas boiled, and the atmosphere grew thick with fury. The Draconid tribe, living in the shadow of these titans, knew they could not survive another war. They turned to the one being they believed could stop it. Rayquaza, the Sky Guardian, who had not descended from the ozone layer in millions of years. But the Draconids did not simply call out. They gathered in the deepest chamber of Meteor Falls, where the meteorites that once fell from the sky now lined the walls like an altar. They held their key stones, meager fragments of those original celestial rocks, and they prayed. Not for power, not for glory, but for survival. Their voices rose together, a single desperate plea directed toward the heavens, and something extraordinary happened. The spiritual energy of their collective prayer channeled through the key stones, forming a beam of light that shot upward, piercing the clouds, reaching the ozone layer. Rayquaza felt it. That surge of human hope, pure and unselfish, resonated with its own ancient duty. The Sky Serpent descended for the first time in eons, its emerald body coiling through the storm. But it was not enough. Even Rayquaza, powerful as it was, could not quell the primal forces alone. It needed more. The Draconids saw the struggle. They redoubled their prayers, pouring every ounce of faith into their stones. And then, for the first time in history, the bond between human and Pokémon transcended its natural limits. The spiritual energy acted as a catalyst, a bridge between mortal devotion and divine power. Rayquaza absorbed that energy, and its form began to change. Its body crackled with newfound strength. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, otherworldly light. The first mega evolution was born. But this was not a transformation born of ambition or conquest. It was born from a desperate plea for survival. Every inch of that new form was shaped by the weight of a people who had nowhere else to turn. Rayquaza Mega evolved, and in a single decisive strike, drove Groudon and Kyogre back into their slumber. The world was saved, but the cost was profound. The Draconids had unlocked a power they barely understood, and in doing so, they had tied their fate to the Sky Guardian forever. The tribe recorded this event in carvings on the walls of Meteor Falls, but as centuries passed, their civilization faded. The secret history of the Meteor Falls inhabitants and their connection to the stars came legend, then myth, then a ghost story whispered by trainers who stumbled upon the caves. The megastones scattered, their origins forgotten, and Rayquaza returned to its celestial post, waiting for another call. But the cycle was not broken. It was merely paused, because the same conflict that triggered the first mega evolution would eventually rise again. And when it did, the Sky Guardian would have to make a choice that echoed through the ages. That is the story we will uncover in the next chapter, the cyclical nature of Rayquaza's intervention. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The Draconid people knelt on the stone floor of Meteor Falls, their voices rising in a chant that echoed through the caverns. They had done this before, centuries earlier, when the world was young and their ancestors first witnessed the primal conflict between Groudon and Kyogre. Now, as the ground trembled and the seas boiled beyond the Hoenn coast, they prayed again, and from the eternal silence of the ozone layer, Rayquaza answered. But here is the mystery that hangs over this entire cycle. Why does the sky-high Pokémon remain dormant, asleep in the thin air above the world, until someone specifically asks for its help? It is not a guardian in the way we imagine a watchful god. It does not patrol, does not monitor the deeds of humans or Pokémon. It simply exists, suspended, coiled in the uppermost reaches of the atmosphere, a silent observer that only stirs when the balance of the planet tips toward absolute destruction. And even then, it does not act unless summoned. This is the cyclical nature of Rayquaza's intervention. The ancient texts of the Draconid tribe describe a pattern that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Groudon would rise from the magma, expanding the continents, and Kyogre would flood the world in response. Their battle was not a war of conquest, but a biological imperative, a primal rhythm older than the first human civilization. And each time, when the sky turned red with volcanic ash and the oceans swallowed the last coasts, something would call to Rayquaza, a prayer, a wish, a concentrated pulse of spiritual energy that pierced the clouds and reached the sleeping dragon. The Draconids understood this better than anyone. They knew that Rayquaza did not intervene out of altruism or duty. It responded to a specific frequency, a resonance that could only be generated by human hearts united in desperation. The tribe preserved this knowledge through oral tradition and carved symbols on the walls of their sanctuary. They taught their children how to focus their will, how to channel hope into a single, tangible force. And when the moment came, that force would travel upward through the ozone layer and awaken the ancient serpent from its millennial slumber. But there is another layer to this story, one that connects the prayer of the Draconids to the strange stones that littered their territory. Those stones, we know them as meteorites, fell from the sky in a shower that the tribe called the Starfall. Among them were the first megastones and the keystones, crystalline fragments that glowed with a light no earthly mineral could replicate. The Draconid elders recognized them immediately as tools. They were not merely rocks from space. They were conduits, bridges between the physical world and the energy that Rayquaza itself drew upon. This is the connection that we are only beginning to understand. The meteorites, the keystones, and the origin of megastones are all pieces of the same cosmic event. Thousands of years ago, a celestial object entered the atmosphere of this planet and broke apart over Hoenn. It carried within it a substance that scientists now call infinity energy, a raw, untamed force that could warp biology and grant temporary evolutionary surges. When the fragments struck the Earth, they imprinted themselves with the memories of the Pokémon that were exposed to them, and humans, clutching the keystones, found they could unlock those memories through their own willpower. But why Hoenn? Why did this meteor fall specifically over this region? And why did the Draconid tribe become the unwitting recipients of such power? The answer may lie in the very forces that Rayquaza was meant to control. Hoenn is the only known place where Groudon and Kyogre have their eternal slumber chambers. The only region where the earth and sea are locked in an endless geological argument. Perhaps the meteor was drawn here. Perhaps the concentrated primal energy of the land and ocean acted as a beacon, pulling the celestial debris toward the exact spot where a dragon of the sky would one day need allies. Or perhaps it was not an accident at all. The Draconids believed that the stars themselves were aware of the conflict below. The meteorites were sent, they said, as a gift and a responsibility. The keystones were the means by which humans could participate in the cosmic balance, not as passive observers, but as active partners. When Rayquaza finally descended and saw the tribe holding those stones, it understood that these creatures had earned the right to stand beside it. And so, for the first time in recorded history, a Pokémon underwent Mega Evolution, not through a bond with a trainer, but through the concentrated belief of an entire people. That moment, roughly 500 years ago, was a turning point. Rayquaza accepted the Draconid invocation and allowed itself to be transformed. The sky split open, and the serpent emerged, wreathed in golden light, its form shifting into something even more terrible and beautiful. The conflict ended. Groudon retreated into the earth, Kyogre sank into the deep, and the world returned to its uneasy equilibrium. But the mystery remains. Why does Rayquaza remain dormant otherwise? And why does it only respond to a summoning that requires human will? Perhaps the answer is simple. Rayquaza is not a god that seeks worship. It is a force of nature, a living weather system that exists beyond morality. It has no desire to rule or to be acknowledged. Its only instinct is to preserve the thin layer of atmosphere that allows life to continue on this planet. When Groudon and Kyogre fight, they threaten that layer, but Rayquaza only stirs when it is sure that the threat is real and that the intervention will be effective. The Draconids, through their prayers, provided the certainty. They became the proof that the world still cared enough to be saved. And so the cycle continues. Every few centuries, the primal giants wake. Every few centuries, the Draconids gather in Meteor Falls and raise their voices. And every few centuries, Rayquaza descends, answers the call, and then returns to its silent vigil above the clouds. It is a partnership written in stone and starfire, one that raises as many questions as it answers. Why were the Draconids chosen? Why did the meteor fall on that particular patch of Earth? And what would happen if no one was left to pray? These are the threads that weave through the fabric of Hoenn's forgotten history. But they are not the only threads. There is another kingdom, far to the north, where a different kind of bond once existed between a Pokémon and its people. A bond that faded not because of conflict, but because of forgetfulness. The golden reign of Calyrex, the king of Galar, stands as a quiet testament to how fragile faith can be, and in its forgotten story, we may find another piece of this puzzle. That is a tale for another chapter. A chapter we will call The Forgotten Reign of Calyrex, where the harvests were endless, the steed was loyal, and the throne crumbled into dust the moment the people stopped believing. We've seen how Rayquaza's interventions were always conditional, summoned only when the world's balance tipped too far, and only when human faith channeled through the Draconids became a catalyst for its power. That connection between belief and a legendary strength is a thread that runs deeper than Hoenn's ancient skies. And nowhere is that thread more delicate, more heartbreaking, than in the story of a Pokémon who once ruled as king, a ruler forgotten not because he was cruel, but because his people simply stopped remembering. Long before the Galar region became known for its sprawling cities, its industrial might, and its championship battles, the land was wild and untamed. Forests stretched from the crown tundra to the southern plains, and the people who lived there were few, scattered, and entirely dependent on the land's mercy. Crops would fail, winters would bite deep, and then came a Pokémon unlike any other. A gentle psychic being with antlers that glowed like the first light of dawn. His name was Calyrex, and he became the king of bountiful harvests. He didn't rule through fear or force. Calyrex's reign was one of pure symbiosis. He would walk among the fields, and the soil would tremble with life. Grains would swell, fruits would ripen out of season, and the forests themselves seemed to lean toward him, offering their energy freely. It wasn't magic in the conventional sense. It was something deeper, a psychic resonance with the very fabric of nature. Calyrex could feel the needs of every plant, every root, every seed, and he could coax them into abundance just by being present. The people who witnessed this didn't just worship him, they trusted him, and that trust, that faith was the fuel that kept his power alive. But a king cannot rule alone. Even a benevolent monarch needs a partner, a companion who shares the burden of leadership, and Calyrex found his in a creature that was anything but gentle. Across the wilds of ancient Galar roamed a massive untamed beast, part horse, part spirit of the frozen north. It was said that no trainer could tame it, that its hooves could crack the earth, and its breath could summon blizzards. This was Glastria, the wild steed that answered to no one. Yet something about Calyrex's quiet authority drew the beast in. Perhaps it was the king's unwavering calm, or perhaps Glastria sensed that this Pokémon was the only one worthy of carrying him into battle. Whatever the reason, they formed a bond that was more than partnership. It was a symbiotic link, two halves of single force. When Calyrex rode Glastria, the land itself seemed to pulse with renewed vigor. The steed's raw strength merged with the king's psychic energy, creating a feedback loop that amplified both. Harvests doubled, forests expanded, the people flourished. But here lies the quiet tragedy of Calyrex's reign. His power was never his own. It was borrowed from the belief of those he protected. The more the people relied on him, the stronger he became. But as generations passed, as Galar grew more technologically advanced, as cities rose and forests receded, the memory of the bountiful Harvest King began to fade. New legends replaced old ones. The kings of men took center stage, and the Pokémon who once fed an entire region became a footnote, a bedtime story that parents no longer told. And with every forgotten prayer, with every lost tradition, Calyrex's power dimmed. He didn't leave. He didn't grow angry. He simply became weaker, his connection to the land fraying like an old rope. What caused that collective amnesia? Was it simple human progression, the natural drift of culture? Or was there something more deliberate at work? Perhaps the same forces that buried the truth of the darkest day, that erased Zacian and Zamazenta from history, also conspired to silence Calyrex. Because if you think about it, a region that forgets its king is a region that can be reshaped, controlled by other powers. We'll never know for certain, but we do know this. Faith is not just a feeling. In the Pokémon world, it is a measurable force, one that can raise a king or bring him to his knees. Calyrex still exists today, somewhere in the Crown Tundra, a ghost of his former self. He waits for a trainer who might remember, who might believe again. But the harvest season he once commanded has long since passed, and the next chapter of his story, true cost of being forgotten, is one that carries a heavy lesson for any creature whose power depends on the hearts of others. That is where we'll turn next, in a chapter called The Death of Faith and the Loss of Power, a story not just about Calyrex, but about every Pokémon whose light depends on the eyes that still look up to them. Calyrex, the king of bountiful harvests, once ruled over a Galar that was green and generous. He guided the turning of the seasons, coaxed crops from the soil, and rode a wild steed that answered only to his command. The people celebrated him, prayed to him, and remembered his name, and for a time, that faith was enough. But nothing, not even a god, can survive the slow erosion of memory. The first cracks appeared when the first forges were lit. The people of Galar began to craft tools, then machines, then entire cities of iron and steam. They discovered coal deep beneath the earth, and later electricity that hummed through cables and light bulbs. Technology offered comfort, convenience, a sense of control that faith could never quite match. And with every new invention, the old stories grew a little quieter. The harvest festivals that once honoured Calyrex became folk tales, then vague traditions, then footnotes in history books. New legends also rose to take his place. The tale of the two heroes who stopped the darkest day became the foundation of Galar's identity, a story of human courage and the sword and shield that ended the storm. Zacian and Zamazenta, though themselves forgotten in official records, were still invoked in whispers. But Calyrex, the gentle king who had never wielded a blade or fought a war, faded further into the background. Who prays to a god of harvest when the fields are ploughed by machines and the granaries are always full? The loss of belief was not merely symbolic, it was physical. Calyrex began to shrink. Where once he stood tall, a towering figure of antlered majesty, his form became smaller, his movements slower. His psychic powers, once capable of controlling the minds of any creature, grew unreliable. He could no longer command his steed, which eventually returned to the wild, untamed and unbound. The king became a ghost in his own kingdom, a memory that no one quite knew how to place. This is the chilling truth at the heart of Calyrex's story. In the Pokémon world, divinity is not inherent, it is borrowed. A god exists only as long as someone remembers it, only as long as a voice speaks its name in prayer, or a heart holds it in reverence. When that connection breaks, the god does not die in a blaze of glory. It dwindles, it fades, it becomes a relic, a curious footnote in a dusty library, until even the footnote is erased. Calyrex was not defeated by a rival deity or a cataclysm. He was defeated by indifference. The people of Galar simply stopped needing him. And when they stopped needing him, they stopped believing. And when they stopped believing, he became less than what he was. He became a Pokémon that could be caught in a Premier Ball, a footnote in a Pokédex entry, a legend that had forgotten itself. Consider what this means for every other ancient being we have discussed. What happens when the Draconid tribe's prayers grow silent? What happens when the people of Johto no longer whisper about the burning tower? What happens when the children of Alola forget why the guardian deities watch over their islands? Faith is not a passive thing. It is a current, a tide, a force that shapes the very nature of these creatures. And when the tide goes out, what is left behind? That question leads us directly to a story that challenges everything we think we know about the relationship between humans and legendary Pokémon. In Alola, 4 guardian deities once fought against the celestial beings Solgaleo and Lunala. They lost, but instead of being destroyed or banished, they were given a gift, the Tapunium Z, and then they were entrusted with the protection of heirs, multiple Cosmog. That would one day become the very beings they had opposed. Why would a victor reward its defeated enemy? What does that say about the nature of power, of legacy, and of the faith that binds them all? That is the mystery we will explore in our next chapter, the Alolan Trial of the Deities. The slow fading of Calyrex's influence in Galar was not an isolated tragedy. Across the world, other gods had faced their own trials, their own moments of defeat, and their own strange paths forward. In the tropical archipelago of Alola, 4 guardian deities had once waged a war against beings of light and shadow, a conflict that ended not in destruction, but in an unexpected gift. The Tapu Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu and Tapu Fini were the protectors of Alola's islands long before any human settlement. They embodied the raw forces of nature: lightning, life, growth, and the sea. For centuries, they watched over the land, ensuring balance. But when Solgaleo and Lunala, the legendary Pokémon of the Sun and Moon, descended upon Alola, the Guardians saw them as a threat. These were not mere visitors. They were cosmic emissaries, beings of light that could reshape reality itself. The Tapu responded as any protector would. They attacked. The war was fierce, but it was not a battle of brute force alone. Solgaleo and Lunala moved with a grace that seemed to bend time. They absorbed the Guardian's elemental fury and reflected it back with precision. The Tapu fought with the fury of islands, but they were outmatched. The Light Trio, as scholars later called them, were not conquerors. They were judges. And when the dust settled, the Guardians of Alola had lost. But what happened next defied every expectation. Instead of punishing the defeated, Solgaleo and Lunala offered them a gift. They bestowed upon the Tapu a unique Z crystal, the Tapunium Z, a relic that could channel the very essence of the islands into a devastating final move. Why would victors reward those who had stood against them? The answer lies in the nature of the conflict itself. The Light Trio had not come to conquer Alola. They had come to test its guardians, to see if they were worthy of a greater responsibility. The Tapu had passed the trial, not because they won, but because they had proven their unwavering dedication to protecting the land. Their defeat was not a failure, it was a lesson. The Tapunium Z was more than a trophy. It was a symbol of alliance, a key to a new era. Solgaleo and Lunala understood that the universe is full of threats, far greater than any local war. They needed protectors who would not waver, guardians who would remember that even the strongest can fall and still rise again. The Tapu had shown that resilience, and so the victors entrusted them with something even more precious than a crystal. They created multiple Cosmog, the star-shaped beings that would one day evolve into New Solgaleo and New Lunala. These were the heirs, the future protectors of Alola and beyond. The Tapu were given these heirs to watch over, to nurture, until the day they might join the cosmic cycle. But this duty came with a price. The Guardians had to ensure that Alola would never be caught unprepared again. They needed a system that would train the island's champions, not just in battle, but in understanding the deeper mysteries of the world. That system became the Island Challenge. It was not a tournament or a ladder of victories. It was a pilgrimage, a journey through trials that tested body, mind, and spirit. Each island's grand trial, led by a kahuna, forced challengers to confront the elemental forces that the Tapu themselves commanded. And at the end of the journey, the challenger would stand before a guardian deity, not as an enemy, but as a worthy successor. The Island Challenge was Alola's answer to cosmic threats. It was a way to forge new bonds, to teach humility, and to prepare for the day when the stars might align once more. The Tapu had learned from their defeat that power alone is not enough. They needed allies, human and Pokémon alike, who could rise to any challenge. And so the islands became a living school, a place where every generation would be tested, where the memory of that ancient war would never fade. Yet one mystery remains. Solgaleo and Lunala created multiple Cosmog. Where are those heirs now? Some evolved and left for the stars. Others may still be hidden, waiting for the moment when Alola needs them again. The Guardians keep their secrets close, but legend whispers of a deeper plan, a chain of light and shadow that stretches across dimensions. That story, the tale of the heirs of the Sun and Moon, is one of the most elusive threads in Pokémon lore. It will take us beyond Alola, into the very fabric of the universe itself. And so, after the war ended, After the Tapu Guardians were defeated by Solgaleo and Lunala, something extraordinary happened. Instead of claiming Alola as their own domain, the legendary Sun and Moon granted the very beings who had opposed them the Tapunium Z, a crystal that allowed the guardian deities to call upon their full power. It was not a trophy of conquest. It was a gift, a seal of trust. And with that trust came an even stranger task. Solgaleo and Lunala did something no other legendary pair is known to have done before or since. They created not one, not two, but multiple heirs, multiple Cosmog. These tiny, fragile nebula Pokémon are perhaps the most vulnerable legendary tier creatures in the entire world. They drift through the air like stardust, barely able to move on their own, utterly defenseless. And yet each one carries the potential to become a being of immense cosmic power. A Solgaleo that can consume the sun, a Lunala that can call the moon, a creature that can tear open the fabric of dimensions and step through to ultraspace. But why would the original Solgaleo and Lunala create multiple heirs? Was it a form of insurance, a way to ensure their legacy persisted across the ages? Or was it something more deliberate? A plan to populate the universe with beings capable of bridging worlds. The Tapu Guardians were tasked with protecting these heirs. Each island of Alola has its own Tapu. Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele on Akala, Tapu Bulu on Ulaula, and Tapu Fini on Pony. They watch over the land, yes, but their deepest duty may be the protection of the Cosmog that are born on their soil. They are cosmic nannies, guardians of the nursery. They shield the weak nebula Pokémon from harm, nurture them until they evolve into Cosmoem, and then into the full-fledged legendaries that will eventually leave this world. And that raises a profound question. Why Alola? Why these islands, scattered in the middle of the ocean, far from the great civilizations of Kanto or Yoto? One compelling theory suggests that Alola is not merely a chain of volcanic islands, it is a nursery for interdimensional travelers. The very geography, the unique energy fields, the ever-present Z crystals that resonate with the light of the sun and moon. All of it points to a place where the boundaries between dimensions are thin, where a Cosmog can safely gestate and grow, protected by the Tapus, before it tears open a wormhole and departs for another universe. Solgaleo and Lunala are said to be able to travel through ultra wormholes, the same corridors used by the Ultra Beasts. Perhaps Alola is a way station, a breeding ground for the species that will one day become the travelers between worlds. The multiple heirs are not a mystery of quantity, they are a mystery of purpose. Each Cosmog is a potential seed planted in the fields of reality, waiting to mature into a bridge between one universe and another. The Tapus, then, are the gardeners. They keep the soil safe. They ensure that nothing disturbs the growth of these cosmic seedlings. And when the time comes, when the nebula Pokémon has evolved and its light blazes bright enough to tear the sky, the Tapus let them go. They have already done their duty. But why did Solgaleo and Lunala reward the very guardians who fought against them? Perhaps because the Tapus proved their worth in that battle. They showed they would fight fiercely to protect their home. And by extension, the heirs that would one day be born there, the defeated guardians, earned the victor's trust through their own strength and loyalty. And so they were given the Tapunium Z, not as a prize, but as the key to fulfilling their new role. This story of cosmic nurseries and interdimensional heirs is one of the most overlooked mysteries in the Pokémon world. It hints at a grand design, a deliberate shaping of the cosmos by beings who are not merely powerful, but purposeful. And yet, even as we ponder the cradle of Alola, there are other ancient traditions and civilizations that held their own secrets. Ones that may redefine our understanding of the very fabric of existence. Ancient Sinnoh, the birthplace of the Sinnoh region's mythology, holds mysteries that reach back even further, into the time when the first beings shaped the world itself. But that is a story for another night. So there we were, in ancient Alola, watching the Tapu Guardians receive their impossible prize from the very legendaries they had fought. A gesture that makes no sense on the surface, but hints at something deeper about the nature of Pokémon gods. That their power is not just in strength, but in purpose. And once that purpose is fulfilled, they move on. They create heirs. They leave. The Cosmog left behind were not trophies, they were seeds. Seeds of a future that the Tapus would nurture until the next cycle began. But what happens when a god has no heirs? What happens when a culture forgets to pass on the story of its creator? Long before the Tapus stood watch over Alola, before Solgaleo and Lunala ever crossed the sky, there was another civilization. Older, stranger, and far more obsessed with origins. They called themselves the Celestica people, and they lived in the ancient Sinnoh region, a land of icy peaks, deep caverns, and a temple carved into the very mountain itself. Their world was one of reverence. They did not worship Dialga or Palkia, not as we know them today. They worshipped something older, something singular. They called it the Almighty Sinnoh. And here is the mystery that haunts Sinnoh's history. The Almighty Sinnoh was not a legendary Pokémon, in the sense we understand. It was not a creature of time or space. It was the original one, Arceus, the alpha Pokémon. The Celestica people did not build shrines to multiple gods. They built everything around a single, primordial being. A being that, according to their tablets and ruins, created all reality from nothing. But then, something happened. The Celestica vanished. Not gradually, not through war or natural disaster. They simply disappeared, leaving behind their temples, their artifacts, and their strange carved plates that spoke of Arceus's power. And those temples, they were buried, sealed underground, as if the very memory of the Almighty Sinnoh needed to be hidden. Why? Why would a culture that worshipped the creator of the universe suddenly bury their holiest sites and fade into silence? The modern world remembers Dialga and Palkia because they are the keepers of time and space, concepts that directly affect our lives. But the original one, the one who set everything in motion, largely forgotten. It is as if history itself conspired to erase the cosmic parent from the family tree. Some scholars suggest that the Celestica people realized the danger of worshipping a being too powerful, that maybe Arceus withdrew, or that the people themselves chose to forget to prevent something catastrophic. Others believe that the burial of the temples was a final act of devotion, a way to preserve the sacred knowledge until the world was ready to understand it. But in the modern era, we are left with only fragments. The Celestica are gone. Their language is dead. Their temples remain buried, and their god sits in the shadows of legend, remembered by a handful of historians and a few cryptic inscriptions. Meanwhile, Dialga and Palkia stand as the faces of Sinnoh's mythology, worshipped by clans and depicted in murals. The original one, the very source of their power, is reduced to a myth within a myth, and that raises an unsettling question. If the Celestica were so devoted to Arceus, why did they let it be forgotten, or did they have no choice? Perhaps the Almighty Sinnoh itself chose to fade, to allow the universe to run on its own rules, independent of its creator. Or perhaps there is something still buried in those temples, something that the Celestica did not want to be found. Whatever the answer, the pattern is hauntingly familiar. A god abandoned by its followers, sealed away, its legacy overshadowed by the very beings it created. And as we've seen before, when a god loses the faith of humans, it loses its power. But sometimes the god isn't gone. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to dig deep enough, waiting for the seal to break. And that brings us to another sealed being, one whose imprisonment speaks not of forgotten faith, but of deliberate fear. Deep in the snowy reaches of Sinnoh, in a temple even more isolated than the Celestica ruins, lies a colossal stone structure. Within it, a creature of immense strength rests, bound by locks and chains forged not by humans, but by other Pokémon. This creature was not worshipped, but contained. This is the story of the Regi Giants, and the reason they were sealed away. The Celestica people vanished, leaving behind temples buried beneath the earth, their worship of the almighty Sinnoh, fading into a silence that no fossil or ruin could fully explain. But they were not the only ancient civilization to build monuments to powers beyond human understanding. Far to the south, on the continent of Hoenn, another story was being etched into stone, quite literally. This is the story of the Regi Giants, and of the hands that shaped not only their bodies, but the very continents themselves. In the era before recorded history, when the world was still raw and malleable, a being of immense strength walked the land. Its name was Regigigas. It was not a god in the sense of Arceus. It did not create life or command the heavens, but it did something perhaps even more fundamental. It moved the earth. With its colossal hands, Regigigas pulled continents into place, dragging land masses across the oceans like a sculptor arranging clay on a wheel. The mountains rose where it pushed, the valleys sank where it pressed, and to aid in this monumental task, Regigigas created 3 servants, 3 smaller giants, each attuned to a primal element. Regirock, formed from the very stone of the earth, could reshape cliffs and carve canyons with a thought. Regis, born from the deepest glaciers, could freeze oceans and lower sea levels, allowing new land to emerge. And Registeel, forged from molten metal drawn from the planet's core, could bind the new terrain with veins of iron and steel. Together, they were not merely Pokémon, they were tools of planetary engineering, the first and only construction crew the world would ever know. For countless centuries, humans watched these giants from a distance. At first, they worshipped them. How could they not? When Regirock lifted a mountain range into the sky, when Regis created a frozen bridge between continents, when Registeel's metallic body gleamed under the sun like a walking fortress, these were acts of pure terrifying power. People left offerings, polished stones for Regirock, ice crystals that never melted for Regis, and for Registeel, intricate metal charms shaped by the first human smiths. The giants did not seem to notice, or perhaps they did not care. They continued their work, reshaping the world according to the silent will of their master. But human worship is fickle, and fear has a way of creeping into reverence. As the giants continued their labours, the scale of their power became impossible to ignore. A single sweep of Regirock's arm could level an entire forest. A blast of Regis's cold could freeze a river solid for 100 years. And Registeel, there were stories of villages that had disappeared. Their inhabitants turned to metallic statues after a careless step from the giant. Whether these tales were true, or simply the product of growing terror, the effect was the same. The people who had once knelt before the giants now began to barricade their doors. They stopped bringing offerings. Instead, they began to whisper prayers of protection, not to the giants but against them. And Regigigas, the great mover of continents, noticed, or perhaps it simply finished its work. The land masses were in place. The oceans had settled into their basins. The world was as it should be. Perhaps the giants were no longer needed. But what does a civilization do with gods that no longer serve a purpose? You cannot simply ask them to leave. You cannot negotiate with the force of nature. You must find a way to contain it. And so ancient humans, driven by fear and a desperate ingenuity, devised a plan. They built chambers, 3 chambers, hidden deep within the caves of Hoenn. Each was a tomb of geometric perfection, carved from the living rock and sealed with an unthinkable puzzle. And the key to those puzzles was not spoken language, not written word, but a code of raised dots, a system of Braille. Why Braille? Perhaps because the creators knew that the giants, beings of stone and ice and metal, could not read it, but humans could. It was a lock designed for the hands, not the eyes. The instructions for opening and sealing the chambers were etched into the very walls, but they required a touch that could feel the subtle bumps. It was a secret language of the blind, or maybe of those who had been blinded by their own fear. Inside those chambers, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel were imprisoned, not defeated in battle. How could any human weapon harm them? No, they were lured, tricked, or simply led into their tombs while they were dormant. And once the doors closed, the world became a quieter place. The giants slept, and the continent stayed still. But the story does not end there. Regigas itself was not imprisoned in Hoenn. It was taken north, to the frozen reaches of Sinnoh, to a temple built in its honour, but also for its containment. The Snowpoint Temple, as it would later be called, became the final resting place of the Master Builder. There Regigigas slumbers, waiting for something, a signal, a call, perhaps the return of its 3 servants, or perhaps it simply waits for the world to need reshaping again. And that is the mystery that still lingers in the cold air of Snowpoint Temple. What would happen if Regigigas ever awoke? What would it do if it learned that its creations were sealed away and that the humans it once helped now feared it? These are questions with no answers, only echoes. And in the next chapter, we will step inside that frozen temple, beneath the snow that never melts, and ask the one question that has haunted every explorer who dared to approach its gates. Why exactly was Regigigas put to sleep, and who will be the one to wake it? We left off with the 3 great giants of Hoenn, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, each sealed away in a chamber designed to keep them dormant, their existence reduced to legend. But the master who created them, the architect of continents himself, Regigigas, was not simply hidden in a cave or a cavern. His prison was something far more deliberate, far more remote, and far colder. The Snowpoint Temple, buried deep in the snow-swept northern reaches of Sinnoh, was never a place of worship in the way we think of temples today. It was a vault, a tomb of ice and stone built not to honour a god, but to ensure that he would never wake. The temple itself is a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Its walls are thick sheets of permafrost, reinforced by stone pillars, carved with patterns that predate any known civilization. The entrance is a series of corridors that seem to lead nowhere, designed to confuse and disorient. And at the heart of this frozen labyrinth, a single chamber holds the answer to one of the most persistent questions in Pokémon history. Why was the Master of the Giants sealed behind a wall of ice and stone? The answer, surprisingly, might not be what you expect. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't fear of destruction. It might have been something far more tragic. Protection. For centuries, the temple remained undisturbed. The local people of Snowpoint City never ventured too close, and even the most determined explorers found themselves turned back by the brutal cold and the maze of hallways. But in the modern era, a few trainers managed to reach that central chamber, and what they found there changed everything we thought we knew about the Regi trio and their creator. The temple's final barrier was not a lock or a key. It was a set of conditions so specific that they seemed almost impossible to fulfill by accident. To enter the chamber, you needed to bring Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, the 3 giants of Hoenn, to the temple. But not just anywhere. You had to position them in a precise arrangement, a pattern that mirrored the ancient Braille instructions carved into the walls. Only then would the floor shift, The ice crack and the inner sanctum reveal itself. Inside, Regigigas sat motionless, buried under a mountain of rock and ice. His eyes were closed. His body, colossal even by legendary standards, was covered in frost and dust. He was not dead. He was sleeping, and the conditions required to wake him were just as exacting. The ancient texts tell us that Regigigas can only be roused when the three Regis are present, and when the temple itself recognizes the harmony of their arrival. But why? Why would the creator of the giants make himself so difficult to awaken? One theory, and it's a compelling one, is that Regigigas did not want to be found. He chose to sleep in that frozen temple because he knew that if he ever woke, something terrible might happen, not because he was dangerous, but because the world that had once worshipped him had become dangerous to him. Consider the timeline. The Regi were created in a distant age, when humanity was still young and the land was raw. Regigigas shaped the continents, dragging mountains and carving valleys. His children, Regirock, Regis and Registeel, were tools for this work, but as human civilizations grew, they began to fear the power they had once revered, and so they sealed the giants away, one by one, in places where they would be forgotten. But Regigigas was different. He was not sealed by humanity, he sealed himself. Or perhaps he was sealed by his own children, the very Regi he had created, in a final act of love to protect him from those who would exploit him. The evidence for this lies in the temple's design. The Braille messages on the walls do not speak of punishment or imprisonment. They speak of rest. They speak of a promise. One line, roughly translated, says, "When the three return, the slumber ends." It does not say, "When the three are captured," or "When the three are subdued." It says, "Return," as if Regigigas was waiting for his family to come back. And when they do, the temple allows them to reunite. But there is another detail, one that haunts every researcher who studies the temple. The inner chamber is not designed to keep Regigigas in. It is designed to keep something else out. The walls are thick, the ice is dense, and the temperature is far below any natural freezing point. It is a fortress built not to hold a prisoner, but to protect a sleeper. The question then becomes, what was Regigigas hiding from? Or perhaps, who was he protecting? Because if the Regi trio were sealed, not for their crimes, but to protect them from humanity, then the master of the giants voluntarily entered that frozen tomb to spare the world from a danger that only he could understand. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to wake up into a world that would fear him. But the temple holds one more secret. The conditions to wake Regigigas are not merely physical, they are ritualistic. The presence of all three Regi is not enough. The temple requires that the trainer who brings them must be worthy, a concept that is never fully explained. Some say that Regigigas can sense the intentions of those who enter. Others believe that the temple itself judges the purity of your heart, and if you fail that test, the ice will never melt, the doors will never open, and the master of the giants will sleep on, buried in the silence of the frozen north, waiting for a time when the world is ready to understand him. That waiting may never end, because even today, no one truly knows why Regigigas chose to lie down in that temple. Was it guilt? Was it grief? Or was it a final act of mercy? We may never have a clear answer, but there is another sealed being, much smaller, yet no less mysterious, whose story is equally entangled in themes of punishment and redemption, bound to a keystone and trapped for centuries. That being awaits a curious soul to uncover the truth of its crime. But that is a story for another night. One that involves 108 souls, a forbidden act, and a spirit that has been waiting far too long for release. The story of Regigigas and its servitor giants carved the very continents, shaping the land for life to flourish. And yet, The creator itself was sealed behind a wall of ice and stone, left to slumber for millennia. The fear that drove humans to imprison such a being speaks to a deeper pattern in this world, the tendency to lock away what we do not understand or what we cannot control. But not all prisons are made of rock and frost. Some are forged from spite, from punishment, from a sentence that lasts not for a lifetime, but for eternity. We turn now to a different kind of binding, a dark ritual that took 108 souls and sealed them into a single stone, not as a tomb but as a cage, not as a burial but as a sentence. This is the story of Spiritomb. There is a tradition in many cultures, both in our world and in the Pokémon world, that certain numbers carry deep meaning. The number 108 appears in Buddhism, representing the earthly temptations a soul must overcome to reach enlightenment. But in the realm of Pokémon, the number 108 is not about freedom, it is about damnation. 500 years ago, a group of 108 beings, we do not know for certain if they were human, Pokémon, or something else, committed a crime so grave that the consequence was not death, not exile, but an eternal binding, a collective punishment. All 108 were taken, and through a ritual steeped in darkness, their spirits were fused and locked inside an odd keystone, a simple, unremarkable rock meant to be carried or placed, never to be left alone. The keystone itself became a prison, and the prison was then tasked to a caretaker, themselves perhaps cursed to guard it, or simply abandoned at a tower, awaiting an unwitting traveller to free the trapped souls. But here is the question that lingers, unanswered by any official record. What misdeed could possibly warrant such a fate? What crime is so heinous that the only just punishment is to strip away individuality, to merge consciousness into a single screaming mass, and bind it to a rock for 5 centuries? The law is silent on the details. Some suggest that these 108 beings were bandits, or perhaps practitioners of forbidden magic. Others whisper that they were a collective of spirits who refused to move on, who clung to the world with such malice that they had to be contained. Yet the punishment itself feels excessive, almost cruel. It was not an execution, it was a perpetual torment. To be trapped together, unable to escape each other's presence, forced to feel the pain and anger of 107 other souls for 500 years, with no hope of release unless a kind soul, or a foolish one, chooses to interact with the keystone. And when that interaction happens, when a trainer approaches the tower or places the keystone in its slot, what emerges is not a single Pokémon with a unified will. It is a Spiritomb, a creature that is both one and many. The Pokédex entry from the Diamond version states that Spiritomb was formed by the union of 108 spirits. It is bound to a fissure in an odd keystone. The Platinum entry adds that because it was bound by a wicked spell, it cannot move properly, but it can bore into the ground and travel through the world via the shadows. So here is the central mystery. Is Spiritomb a single entity, a gestalt consciousness born from the fusion of 108 souls? Or is it a collective, a chorus of voices trapped in one body, all screaming at once, forced to cooperate only because they share one prison? The design of Spiritomb suggests a paradoxical nature. Its face, if you can call it, that is a swirl of purple and black, with a single glowing eye and a mouth full of what might be teeth. But that face is not fixed. In the games, Spiritomb's sprite shifts and warps, as if the spirits inside are constantly struggling for dominance. The eye may be one entity looking out, while the others press against the inside of the keystone, desperate to be seen. The way Spiritomb moves in battle, hovering, phasing through obstacles, only adds to the sense of a contained chaos. It is a creature that should not exist, held together by a grudge and a curse. The moral ambiguity of this punishment is troubling. Were the 108 truly guilty, or were they victims of a ritual meant to contain a threat that could not be killed? The phrase "wicked spell" in the Pokédex suggests that the binding itself was an act of evil, that the caster was no better than the imprisoned. Perhaps the original crime was not committed by the spirits at all, but by the one who performed the binding. We will never know. The records from that era are lost, and the spirits themselves, when encountered, offer no coherent testimony. They only lash out, attacking with dark energy, as if their only language is pain. And that brings us to a deeper question. Can Spiritomb ever be redeemed? Can a consciousness formed from 108 tormented souls ever find peace? The games offer a sliver of hope. In some interpretations, capturing Spiritomb is a form of mercy. The trainer, by taking the keystone, becomes the new warden, but also a potential friend. Through the bond of battle and trust, perhaps the spirits can begin to heal, to separate, or to find harmony. But this is speculation. The lore never confirms that Spiritomb can be fully freed. The odd keystone remains a part of its existence, a permanent reminder of a crime that nobody remembers. The punishment then is not just eternal, it is purposeless. It serves only to contain, not to rehabilitate. And that is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. As we draw this chapter to a close, consider the nature of punishment in the Pokémon world. The giants were sealed because they grew too powerful. The Alolan deities were bound to a different kind of duty. And now, 108 spirits are locked in stone. Their voices merged into a single groan of despair. But not all mysteries are about imprisonment. Some are about transformation, about a sudden, inexplicable change that reshapes an entire species. The next chapter will take us back in time, to an era before memory, when the weakest creature in the world underwent a mutation that would define its fate forever. What happened to the Magikarp? The answer lies in a forgotten event that turned a once formidable fish into a laughingstock, and how that very weakness became the key to its ultimate triumph. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The binding of 108 spirits to an odd keystone, a punishment lasting 5 centuries. That story speaks to a justice system older and stranger than anything in the modern Pokémon world. But what happens when the punishment isn't inflicted by gods or ancient sages, but by nature itself over millions of years? What if an entire species is forced into weakness, not by a curse, but by a survival strategy so extreme it rewrites the very definition of evolution? Tonight, we investigate the mystery of the Magikarp, not the flailing, useless fish you see flopping in every pond and river, but the creature it used to be. Because buried in ancient records, in fragments of lore from regions that no longer exist, there are descriptions of Magikarp as something powerful and majestic, a Pokémon that once commanded respect, perhaps even fear. And the question that haunts every researcher who stumbles on these texts is simple. What happened? Let's start with the evidence. The oldest known Pokédex entries, when cross-referenced with archaeological digs in the Yoto and Kanto regions, reveal a consistent pattern. Magikarp's lineage stretches back hundreds of millions of years. Fossil evidence shows that its ancestors were large, aggressive predators. Some estimates put them at over 15 feet in length, with fins built for speed and teeth designed for tearing. These ancient Magikarp were apex hunters in their prehistoric seas. They were powerful, they were majestic, and then something changed. The transition doesn't appear gradual. There are no intermediate fossils showing a slow decline. Instead, the record seems to jump from these formidable ancient forms directly to the modern, pathetic version today. That suggests not evolution, but mutation, a sudden, deliberate shift in the species' biology. But what could cause such a dramatic and seemingly self-destructive transformation? This is where the biological mystery deepens. You see, the modern Magikarp's weaknesses are not random. They are specific, systematic, and almost engineered. Its muscles are almost entirely white, fast twitch fibers that allow for only the briefest bursts of energy. Its scales are thin and easily damaged. Its brain is wired for panic, not problem solving. And its most famous trait, its inability to do anything but splash and flee, is actually an adaptation, albeit a cruel one. Scientists who have studied the Magikarp genome at the cellular level have found something astonishing. The mutation is not a flaw, it is a survival mechanism, and it appears to have been triggered by a massive external pressure. The leading theory is that, at some point in the distant past, Magikarp were hunted to the brink of extinction by a predator so efficient that any individual with even moderate strength or endurance was immediately targeted and killed. The only Magikarp that survived were the ones too weak to be worth eating, too scrawny, too slow, too unappealing. Over generations, the species intentionally, if unconsciously, bred itself into weakness. It was a form of camouflage, a biological sacrifice. By becoming the least appetizing, least threatening thing in the water, Magikarp ensured its own survival, but at a terrible cost. The majestic predator became the flopping, splashing joke we know today. And the question is, what predator could have been so relentless that an entire species evolved away from strength? Some researchers point to the ancestors of Pokémon like Pidgeot, Fearow, or even Gyarados itself. After all, Gyarados is the evolution of Magikarp, a violent, powerful dragon that terrorizes coasts. It's possible that Gyarados' own ancestors preyed on Magikarp, creating a cycle where the only way to escape predation was to become weak, then evolve into the very thing that once hunted you. A kind of evolutionary irony, but the deeper mystery remains unsolved. Why did the mutation happen so quickly? What environmental catastrophe coincided with this shift? And most unsettling of all, why do modern Magikarp still retain the genetic potential to become Gyarados? If weakness was supposed to be a permanent adaptation, why is the power still locked inside, waiting for a trigger? Perhaps the mutation is incomplete. Perhaps the ancient records that describe Magikarp as powerful are not just describing fossils, but a dormant state, a slumbering potential that could, under the right conditions, reawaken. But for now, the Magikarp of the present remains a mystery wrapped in scales and splashes, a creature that defeated its predators by becoming prey. This strange dance between power and weakness, between majesty and humiliation, is not unique in the Pokémon world. There are other beings whose history has been hidden, whose true natures were buried beneath worship and fear. And in our next chapter, we will turn to a civilization that bowed before a Pokémon made of living metal, a creature that could create matter from nothing, and whose followers vanished as mysteriously as their god. We ended the last chapter standing at the edge of a biological mystery, a species that once held immense power, then somehow across generations became a punchline. The Magikarp of ancient times was nothing like the flopping fish we know today, and that transformation raises an uncomfortable question. If a creature can change so completely over time, what else might have been lost, not through evolution, but through the slow erosion of memory? What other powers have faded from the world? Not because they disappeared, but because we stopped paying attention. This brings us to a very different kind of forgotten force. Not a Pokémon that grew weaker, but one that built entire civilizations from the ground up. A Pokémon whose very body was a resource, a miracle, and eventually a ghost story. I'm talking about Melmetal and the lost people who worshipped it. Imagine a time before steel mills, before forges, before any kind of metalworking. Imagine a human society that had no iron, no copper, no bronze, nothing harder than wood or bone. And then one day, they encounter a creature that oozes liquid metal from its own body. Not just any metal, but a shimmering, semi-fluid substance that when cooled, becomes stronger and more malleable than anything they had ever touched. This was the gift of Melmetal. The ancient civilization that revered Melmetal did not just see it as a Pokémon, they saw it as a living forge, a divine wellspring. Over centuries, this bond transformed their entire way of life. Where other cultures struggled to mine, ore, and shape it through fire, the Melmetal worshippers simply gathered around their deity and collected the liquid metal that dripped from its body. They learned to mold it while it was still warm, to cast it into tools, weapons, and structures that would have been impossible for any contemporary society. They built bridges that spanned impossible distances, towers that reached toward the sky, and intricate gears that powered machines far ahead of their time. All of it came from that endless, flowing metal. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. Despite the prosperity this relationship brought, the Melmetal worshippers did not leave behind grand monuments or written records. We know of them only through scattered ruins and the fossilized remains of their Pokémon partner. And those fossils tell a puzzling tale. Melmetal seems to have vanished from the world entirely, disappearing from the fossil record at some point in the distant past. No one knows why. Perhaps the civilization collapsed. Perhaps the Melmetal itself grew weary of being exploited. Or perhaps the very thing that made it so valuable, its ability to create metal from nothing, ultimately became its undoing, attracting enemies or exhausting its own energy. For millennia, Melmetal was considered a legend, a myth, a Pokémon that had never truly existed. Then recently, in what can only be described as a rediscovery, a living Melmetal was found. Not in some hidden temple, but in the hands of a modern trainer. It had survived, dormant, perhaps in some sealed chamber, waiting for the right moment to return. And with it came whispers of the lost civilization, of the liquid metal that once built a world. But that rediscovery raises more questions than it answers. Why did Melmetal hide? What did its worshippers do that caused them to fade so completely? And most chilling of all, if a civilization that had access to infinite metal could vanish without a trace, what does that say about the permanence of our own achievements? The Melmetal worshippers are not the only culture that disappeared into the cold fog of prehistory. Before we leave this chapter, I want to take you deeper into the ice, to a time when the world was locked in a frozen grip and a creature of pure tusked might migrated across continents. That is where we will go next, into the Ice Age and the mystery of the Mamoswine migration. A story of survival, adaptation, and a species that may have been shaped by forces far older than any human civilization. From the lost civilization that worshipped Melmetal and its miraculous liquid metal, we now turn to a different kind of ancient world. One shaped not by devotion to a single Pokémon, but by an entire planet locked in ice. 10,000 years ago, the world was a very different place. The seas were lower, the land bridges were exposed, and across the northern hemisphere, glaciers advanced like slow-moving titans, carving mountains and reshaping continents. This was the last great ice age, a time when the very air seemed to bite with every breath, when snow fell for months on end, and when life had to adapt or perish. And in that frozen crucible, one Pokémon rose to dominance, the Mamoswine. Picture, if you will, a landscape of endless tundra, where the wind howls across fields of ice and the sun barely rises above the horizon. This was the world the Mamoswine called home. Their ancestors, the Piloswine, had already adapted to the cold with thick shaggy fur and a powerful sense of smell that could detect prey beneath the snow. But the Ice Age pushed them further. The Mamoswine that emerged were colossal, their tusks curving like sabres, their bodies insulated by layers of fat and dense hair. They were the apex of their lineage, perfectly attuned to a world that seemed designed for them. But why did they flourish so dramatically? What made the Ice Age so favourable? The answer lies in the environment. With vast stretches of open grassland frozen into permafrost, the Mamoswine had an abundant food supply. Hardy shrubs, mosses, and the tough roots that survived beneath the snow. Their size and strength allowed them to break through ice to reach water, and their migration patterns followed the slow pulse of the glaciers, always moving toward fresh grazing lands. It was a golden age for the species, a time when their population swelled and their range expanded across what is now Sinnoh, Yoto, and even parts of Unova. And yet, there is a mystery woven into this story. The Ice Age, according to the geological record, should have ended much earlier than it did. Something prolonged the freeze, kept the world in a state of deep winter for centuries beyond the natural cycle. Scientists and historians in the Pokémon world have long debated what that something might be. Some point to the legendary Titans, Regis in particular, whose power over absolute zero could have influenced global temperatures. Others whisper of Kyurem, the boundary Pokémon of Unova, whose very existence is tied to cold and emptiness. But the most compelling theory involves a more subtle force: the collective energy of the Mamoswine themselves. You see, Mamoswine are deeply connected to the ice. Their tusks are not just for digging or combat. They are conduits for a kind of ancient energy, one that resonates with the frigid environment. Some researchers believe that as the Mamoswine population swelled, their presence amplified the cold, creating a feedback loop that held the glaciers at bay. The more Mamoswine there were, the longer the Ice Age persisted. And if that is true, the end of the Ice Age was not a gradual warming, but a tragic cascade that began when the first Mamoswine began to decline. What caused that decline? The same forces that had once favoured them turned against them. As the world warmed, the permafrost began to thaw, turning solid ground into muddy marshes. The grasslands shrank, replaced by forests that offered little sustenance. The great herds fragmented, forced into smaller and smaller territories. And then came the humans. As civilizations grew, they hunted Mamoswine for their tusks and meat, driving the species further toward the edge. The Pokémon that had once ruled the Ice Age became a relic of a lost era. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the story is what the Mamoswine left behind. Their migration routes are etched into the land itself. Ancient paths worn deep by millions of hooves over thousands of years. In the Crown Tundra, you can still find massive fossilized tusks protruding from the ice, reminders of a time when these gentle giants roamed freely. And in the modern day, the few Mamoswine that remain are either bred in captivity or hidden in the most remote wilderness. Their numbers a shadow of what they once were. The Ice Age of the Pokémon world is more than a chapter in natural history. It is a cautionary tale about balance. The very forces that allowed the Mamoswine to thrive also sealed their fate. And while we may never know for certain whether supernatural factors extended the global freeze, the lingering cold of that era can still be felt in the icy peaks of Sinnoh and the frozen tundras of the north. It is a silence that asks, what other species have risen and fallen with the turning of the world? And now, as the ice retreats and the secrets of the past are slowly revealed, another mystery waits beneath the surface. A place where the earth itself opened up, and the first explorers to descend into its depths found wonders and dangers beyond imagination. That story begins in a crater a vast scar in the landscape where time seems to stand still and the very Pokémon glow with an energy that defies explanation. But that is a tale for another night. From the frozen tundra of 10,000 years ago, from the mammoth migrations and the lingering supernatural cold, we now descend into a chasm that defies the natural order itself. At the heart of the Paldea region, a wound in the earth, a perfect circle 10 miles wide, its walls plunging into darkness, so absolute that light itself seems to surrender. The great crater of Paldea, a place that has remained sealed, for the most part, for centuries. But 200 years ago, one man dared to enter. That man was Heath, and his expedition would uncover secrets that the world was not yet ready to understand. It was the year 1824 by the human calendar. The Paldea region was still a land of sprawling wilderness and isolated settlements. Explorers spoke of a crater at the center of the continent, a scar left by some ancient cataclysm, where strange lights flickered at night and Pokémon that defied classification were said to dwell. Heath, a scholar and adventurer, assembled a team. He gathered provisions, secured permits from the crown, and descended into the abyss. What he found there would change the course of Paldean history. And yet his full report was locked away in a forgotten archive for generations. The descent took days. The walls of the crater were not barren rock. They were layered with mineral deposits that glowed with an eerie luminescence. The further down they went, the denser the air became, thick with humidity and the scent of ozone. Strange sounds echoed from below, not the calls of known Pokémon, but something deeper, more resonant. And then at the bottom, they found a world unlike any other, a subterranean forest where giant crystals jutted from the ground like trees, pulsing with internal light. The ecosystem was self-contained. Rivers of clear water flowed in circuits, feeding flora that had never seen the sun. But it was the plants that drew Heath's attention. Among the crystalline thickets, there grew a vine unlike any documented. It bore fruit, or rather clusters of berries, that shimmered with an iridescent sheen. The expedition's botanist collected samples with trembling hands. They called it the Herba Mystica, the mysterious herb. It radiated energy warmth, a faint hum that could be felt in the bones. Heath knew immediately that this was no ordinary plant, but before analysis could be performed, the local Pokémon emerged. They came from the shadows of the crystal forest. Pokémon that had adapted to this strange energy, that had fed on the Herba Mystica for generations. And in that moment, Heath witnessed something extraordinary. The moment a Pokémon consumed the herb, its body began to change. Not just a shift in colour or size, but a fundamental transformation. Muscles bulged, hides thickened, eyes glowed with a light that mirrored the crystals. These were not simply larger Pokémon, they were titans, beings of immense power towering over the expedition team, their presence distorting the air around them. The titans were born that day, through evolution or breeding, but through the direct consumption of the Herba Mystica, and the consequences did not stop at size. The titans, now empowered, began to compete for the remaining herb. The natural food chain of the crater shattered. Pokémon that once preyed on smaller creatures now hunted their own kind, driven by an insatiable hunger for the herb's energy. Predator and prey became meaningless. Only the strongest could survive in this new chaotic hierarchy. Heath and his team barely escaped with their lives, carrying only a single wilted sample of the Herba Mystica and a journal filled with frantic sketches. The crater sealed itself again, as if guarding its secrets. For nearly 2 centuries, the story of Heath's expedition was dismissed as myth, a tall tale told by old explorers, but the samples remained. The journal remained, and slowly, modern science began to unravel the truth. The Herba Mystica was not merely a plant. It was a conduit for the terrestrial phenomenon, the same energy that now defines Paldea's unique battle style. The crystals in the crater, the light, the power of the Titans, all of it was connected to something deeper, something that slumbers beneath the crater's floor, and that something has a name. But that is a story for another chapter. What we know now is that the great crater of Paldea holds answers we have barely begun to ask. The Titans, once thought to be anomalies, are now recognized as the first generation of Pokémon to have fully integrated the terrestrial energy into their biology. The food chain that was distorted 200 years ago has still not recovered fully. Even today, certain species in the crater exhibit unusual aggression and size, and Heath's expedition, its true purpose remains unclear. Did he seek knowledge, or was he drawn by something more? Some believe he was guided, that the crater wanted to be discovered, but the greatest mystery of all lies just beneath the surface. The terrestrial phenomenon is not merely a local oddity, it is a signal. And the source of that signal is a Pokémon so ancient, so powerful, that it has been sleeping for eons. When it awakens, and it will awaken, the world will have to reckon with a power that has shaped the very fabric of Paldea. That power is known as Terapagos, and its story is the key to everything. But we are not quite ready for that descent. Not yet. The previous chapter left us at the bottom of the great crater of Paldea. 200 years ago, explorer Heath and his team had just discovered the Herba Mystica, those strange plants that granted immense power to any Pokémon that consumed them. But the expedition did not end there. As they ventured deeper into what would later be called Area Zero, they found something else, something that would take centuries to fully understand. They found crystals, not the ordinary geological formations you might find in a cave, but crystals that pulsed with an inner light, crystals that seemed to hum with a frequency just beyond human hearing. And when a Pokémon touched them, something impossible happened. The creature's type shifted, changed, became something new. A Pikachu became a water type. A Geodude became a ghost type. The expedition recorded these events in their journals, but they had no way to explain them. Now in the modern era, we call this the terrestrial phenomenon. It is unique to the Paldea region, and it is tied directly to those crystalline structures that Heath and his team first documented. But what are those crystals, and why do they have the power to change a Pokémon's elemental nature? The answer lies in a creature so ancient and so reclusive that it was considered a myth until very recently, a Pokémon known as Terapagos. Terapagos is not just any Pokémon. It is the source of the terrestrial energy that suffuses the entire region. But Terapagos did not create this energy deliberately. It is more like a living wellspring, a being whose very existence radiates a kind of crystallized power, and that power, over countless millennia, has seeped into the earth, forming the crystals we now see. The crystals are like fingerprints, echoes of Terapagos's presence, concentrated at the heart of the great crater, but spreading outward across all of Paldea. This raises a profound question. If Terapagos is the source, and if its energy can transform Pokémon types so dramatically, why is this phenomenon confined strictly within Paldea's borders? Why does a trainer from Kanto or Sinnoh never encounter a terrestrial Pokémon? The answer appears to be that the energy is not just tied to the crystals, it is bound to the land itself. Paldea's geography, its climate, its very tectonic history may have created a unique containment field. Perhaps the crater acts as a kind of natural resonator, focusing Terapagos's power into a stable region-wide network. Beyond those borders, the energy dissipates, becomes too diffuse to cause any change. But there is another layer to this mystery. The crystals in Area Zero are not static. They grow, they pulse, they respond to the presence of life. And Terapagos itself is hidden somewhere deep within that abyss, sleeping perhaps, or waiting. What would happen if that seal were broken? What if the energy were to spread beyond Paldea? Would every Pokémon in the world suddenly be able to terrestrialize? Or would it cause something far more unstable? Something the world is not ready for? These are the questions that keep researchers awake at night, and they are only the beginning, because there is another mystery lurking within the same ancient records, a puzzle that stretches across time and space itself, a paradox that could rewrite everything we know about the relationship between Pokémon, humanity, and the fabric of reality. That story will take us to a place where cause and effect no longer behave as they should, where past and future collide in a single impossible moment. A story we must explore next, the paradox of time and space. The connection between the crystalline structures in the crater and the terrestrial energy led us to Terrapagos, that ancient creature slumbering at the heart of Area Zero. But the mysteries of that chasm do not end with a single legendary Pokémon. In fact, the deeper you descend into the great crater of Paldea, the more the laws of nature seem to bend, twist, and finally break. Consider what the expedition logs from 2 centuries ago recorded. Heath and his team documented something that was dismissed for generations as fever dreams, hallucinations brought on by the strange energies of the crater. He produced sketches of creatures that should not exist, beasts with features that did not match any known fossil, any living species, any evolutionary line that science could trace. And the sketches were not mere fantasy. They were detailed anatomical drawings, complete with notes about behavior, habitat, even the texture of their hides. But they were dismissed, filed away as the product of a stressed mind. After all, how could a creature that looked like a prehistoric version of a modern Pokémon exist in the present day? And how could another sketch depict a creature that looked like a futuristic, mechanical version of that same Pokémon, as if pulled from a time yet to come? That is the paradox. And it is a paradox that refused to stay in the margins of history. When modern explorers finally reached the lowest depths of Area Zero, they found them, the Pokémon that Heath had drawn, living, breathing, and very much real. They were given the official classification of Paradox Pokémon, a term that is almost an admission of defeat, because these creatures defy the very concept of a fossil record. They are not ancestors that died out and left bones behind. They are not future evolutions that have yet to occur. They exist now, in the same space and the same time, as if the timeline itself has folded upon itself and spilled its contents into one dizzying layer. Take the example of a Pokémon that resembles a great, ancient beast of the past. Its body is covered in primitive scales, its stance is more feral, and its roar carries a weight that predates human civilization. Then, in the same crater, you can encounter a sleek metallic version of that same species, with glowing eyes and limbs that suggest advanced adaptation. One looks like it belongs in a fossil dig from 100 million years ago. The other looks like it belongs in a laboratory designing the weapons of tomorrow. They are the same Pokémon, and yet they are not. They are separated by an immense chasm of time, but they share the same habitat, the same ecosystem, the same moment. The implications are staggering. It means that Area Zero is not merely a geological feature, not just a crater formed by some ancient impact or volcanic collapse. It is a wound in the fabric of reality, a localized rift where the normal flow of time and space has been perforated. Think of it as a pinhole in the membrane of the universe. On one side, the past, on the other side, the future, and in the middle, Area Zero, where both sides pour through and mingle like two rivers meeting in a turbulent confluence. How is this possible? The best theories point back to Terrapagos. That crystalline turtle is not just a source of terrestrial energy, but a nexus point for the very structure of space-time. Its dormant power may be what holds the rift open or perhaps what keeps it from tearing wider and consuming all of Paldea. But Terrapagos is ancient, older than human memory, and its purpose was never fully understood by the civilizations that came before. Heath, for all his brilliance, was ridiculed for his sketches. They called him a fantasist, but he was the first human to look into the abyss and see the truth. He saw Pokémon that should not exist, and he dared to draw them. Those drawings were not imaginary. They were field notes from the edge of reality, and now, 200 years later, we have confirmed every single one. There is a haunting detail in those old journal entries. Heath wrote that while he was sketching one of these paradox creatures, he felt a strange chill, as if the air around him was humming with a frequency that made his bones vibrate. He looked up and saw the sky above the crater swirling with colours that did not belong to any sunset or storm. He described it as the sky bleeding, and then the creature he was drawing turned its head and looked directly at him, not with aggression, but with a kind of ancient recognition, as if it knew that Heath was seeing something he was never meant to see. Those words echo now more than ever, because we are still looking into that abyss. And the more we study the paradox Pokémon, the more we realise that time is not a straight line. It is a sphere, or a loop, or perhaps a tangled knot that Area Zero has loosened. The rules we thought were immutable, the fossil record, the tree of evolution, the arrow of time itself, are all trembling on the edge of being rewritten. But if reality can be torn open in one place, what does that mean for the rest of the world? If faith can move legends, as we saw with Rayquaza and Calyrex, then what happens when faith wavers? When the worship of a deity fades, does the deity fade too? That is the next thread we must pull. And it leads us directly to the question of how belief and divinity are intertwined in this world. A mystery that will demand we examine the very source of a Pokémon's power. The correlation of faith and divinity is not just a spiritual idea. It may be the key to understanding why some legends thrive while others are forgotten, and why some truths are painted as fairy tales until reality itself proves them real. The paradox of time and space left us standing at the edge of a rift, a tear in the fabric of reality at the bottom of Area Zero, and that discovery forces a question that ripples outward through every legend we have ever known. If time and space can bend, what else can? What other forces shape this world that we have never truly understood? Perhaps the answer lies not in the crater of Paldea, but in the very relationship between humans and the beings they call gods. Let us begin where faith and power first collide, in the forgotten reign of Calyrex. Long before the Industrial Revolution painted Galar in smoke and steel, Calyrex ruled as a Pokémon king. Its antlers shimmered with the light of 1,000 bountiful harvests, tamed a wild beast of ice and shadow, rode through the fields, and brought prosperity to every corner of the region. The people celebrated Calyrex with festivals. They carved its likeness into stone. They whispered its name in prayers before planting season, and Calyrex answered. It was a golden age, a symbiosis between a legendary Pokémon and the civilization that revered it. But then something changed. The people began to forget. Perhaps it was the arrival of new technologies. Perhaps it was war, or migration, or simply the slow drift of time. Generation after generation, the stories of Calyrex grew fainter. The temples crumbled. The festivals ended. And as the collective memory of this once mighty king faded, so too did its power. Calyrex shrank. Its antlers dimmed. The wild beast it had tamed wandered away, and Calyrex became a recluse in the deep forests, barely able to sustain itself. Today, if you catch a glimpse of it in the Crown Tundra, it appears almost fragile. A far cry from the sovereign that once ruled all of Galar. The correlation is undeniable. Calyrex's strength was directly tethered to the faith of the people. When the belief vanished, the divinity withered. Now take that pattern and carry it across the sea to Hoenn, to the Draconid tribe and the sky dragon Rayquaza. For millions of years, Rayquaza dwelled in the ozone layer, rarely descending to the world below. It intervened only when the primal forces of Kyogre and Groudon threatened to tear the planet apart, and even then it did not act on its own. The ancient records of the Draconid people tell a precise story. During a cataclysmic clash between the two titans, the tribe gathered in Meteor Falls. They prayed. They channeled their spiritual energy through a key stone, and it was that human faith, that concentrated collective will, that allowed Rayquaza to undergo the first recorded mega evolution. The prayers did not merely summon Rayquaza, they amplified it. Without the devotion of the Draconids, Rayquaza might never have achieved the power necessary to quell the storm. This was not an isolated miracle. 500 years later, when the conflict reignited, the Draconids prayed again, and again Rayquaza answered. The pattern holds. Divine intervention is conditional on human belief, and so we arrive at the ancient Sinnoh civilization. 2,000 years before the events of the Hisui region, a powerful society worshipped Arceus as the almighty Sinnoh. They carved temples into mountains. They inscribed legends on stone tablets. They believed that Arceus created the universe, that Dialga and Palkia governed time and space, and that Giratina lurked in a world apart. The civilization flourished under the certainty of their faith. But then, something happened. The civilization vanished. Its temples collapsed into ruins. The worship of Arceus became scattered and fragmented, preserved only in obscure texts and the whispered traditions of the Celestica people. By the time settlers arrived in Hisui, Arceus was little more than a myth, a name spoken with doubt. And what happened to the three dragons? Dialga, Palkia and Giratina retreated into their own dimensions. Their influence on the physical world became sporadic, subtle, almost invisible. Some say they sleep, others say they wait. But the terrifying realization is this: their activity, their very presence in our world, seems to ebb and flow with the tide of human awareness. When the people of Sinnoh stopped actively believing, the gods withdrew, synthesizing the patterns of Calyrex, Rayquaza, and the Sinnoh gods reveals a single unsettling thread. Pokémon power levels are tethered to human collective consciousness. The more a community believes, the stronger the legend becomes. The more it prays, the more the legend intervenes. And when belief falters, the legend fades, not merely from memory, but from reality itself. Calyrex lost its physical power. Rayquaza stopped descending. Arceus became a relic of old tales. This is not a metaphor for cultural decline. It is a direct, measurable principle of how the Pokémon world operates. The gods are not independent sovereigns. They are mirrors. They are reflections of the human heart. Which brings us to the question that haunts every historian and every lawkeeper in this world. What happens to the world when the last person stops believing in the legends? If every temple crumbles, if every prayer stops, if every story is forgotten, will the legend simply cease to exist? Will the weather stabilize without Kyogre and Groudon? Will time and space collapse without Dialga and Palkia? Or will something else rise in their place? The records offer no answer. We have only fragments, whispers, and the lingering sense that we are walking on the edge of a great unknown. Perhaps the answer lies in the gaps between the stories we have already told. Perhaps it waits in the silence of a forgotten shrine, in the last page of a burned manuscript, in the memory of a child who will be the final keeper of the flame. But those threads are unraveling even now, and they lead to places we have not yet dared to explore. That is the journey ahead, a deep dive into the unsolved remnants of every mystery we have touched, the fragments that refuse to fit neatly into any theory. That will be the subject of our next exploration, a a chapter called The Unsolved Threads of the Lore, where we gather the loose ends and see if they weave together into something darker than we ever imagined. For now, let the weight of this realization settle. The gods of the Pokémon world are not watching us from above. They are listening, and when the last voice goes silent, so will they. We have seen how faith shapes the very fabric of a Pokémon's power, how Calyrex's reign withered as belief faded, how Rayquaza answered the prayers of the Draconid people, and how the Sinnoh gods themselves may owe their perceived divinity to the collective consciousness of a civilization long gone. These patterns hint at something deeper, something unsettling, that the world of Pokémon is not a static place of fixed histories, but a living tapestry woven by memory, worship, and fear. And yet there are threads that refuse to be tied, knots that no amount of faith can undo. Tonight, we turn to the unsolved threads of the lore, the questions that linger in the margins of every legend, and the warnings that the modern world continues to ignore. Consider the story of the three legendary beasts. Entei, Raikou, Suicune. We know how they came to be. Lightning struck the brass tower, and three unnamed Pokémon perished in the flames. Ho-Oh resurrected them as the heralds of the legendary beasts, each embodying a different elemental force. But this is where the narrative stumbles. What were those three original Pokémon? The lore is silent. Were they ordinary creatures, a Pidgey, a Mareep, a Vaporeon, or something more? The brass tower was a sacred place, a twin tower of the burned tower, linked to the legendary birds of Yoto. Could those unnamed three have been unique beings themselves? And why only them? The fire claimed many lives that night, for sure, but Ho-Oh chose only three for resurrection. What made them special? What was their original identity, their original form? The fact that this question has never been answered suggests that the world has forgotten something vital about the nature of death and rebirth in the Pokémon universe. The beasts exist as symbols, but their origins remain a void. Then there are the Regi, Regirock, Regis, Registeel, and the Master Regigas. Ancient humans sealed them away, Regigigas at Snowpoint Temple, the three at various locations in Hoenn. The lore tells us that they were sealed because they were too powerful, perhaps destructive. But why sealing? Why not destruction, or simply letting them be? The act of sealing implies fear, but also a desire to preserve. It suggests that ancient humans believed these beings could be contained, that their power could be locked away if enough effort was put into the binding. The Regia golems, constructed from rock, ice, and steel, animated by a strange energy. They are not born, they are made, and their master, Regigigas, is said to have moved continents in ancient times. The sealing of such creatures is a recurring theme, a pattern of human response to things they cannot control. When faced with something beyond understanding, the instinct is not to understand, but to contain. The brass tower and the fires that consumed it, the darkest day, the battles between Groudon and Kyogre. Each time, humans have reacted with sealing, hiding, or forgetting. This pattern is not unique to the Regi. Spiritomb, a creature formed of 108 malevolent spirits, was bound to an odd keystone as punishment for its misdeeds. What did it do? The game tells us it was a Pokémon formed from unatoned sins. But what crime requires an eternal prison? And who decided that punishment? The keystone is a simple object, yet it holds immense power to contain. The message is clear. The ancient civilizations of the Pokémon world saw sealing as the ultimate solution to threats they could not vanquish. They left warnings too. The words inscribed on the ruins, the murals on the walls, the tales passed down through tribes. But the modern world, with its Pokeballs and scientific explanations, has largely ignored these warnings. We capture Pokémon, we study them, we categorize them into data. But the act of sealing is still with us. in the form of containment, in the way we treat the unknown as something to be tamed. The Draconid people warned about the dangers of unchecked power. The ancient Sinner civilization left clues about the true nature of Arceus. The Melmetal worshippers built their society around a creature that could create metal from nothing, and then they vanished. Why? Did the power consume them? Did they seal the Melmetal away? The answer is lost, but the echo remains. And in Galar, the legend of Calyrex warns of what happens when a god is forgotten. The warnings are everywhere. Do not forget, do not abuse, do not presume to control. But the modern world continues to ignore them. We build towers, we harness energy, we challenge the legendary Pokémon in battle as if they were no different from a Pidgey. We forget that these beings were worshipped, that they were sealed for a reason. And so we are left with a tapestry of loose ends. The original forms of the beasts, the true nature of the Regi, the reason for Spiritom's punishment, the location of AZ's eternal partner, the boundaries of Area Zero, the paradox of time and space. These are not just mysteries, they are warnings. They tell us that the Pokémon world is older, stranger, and more fragile than we imagine. The faith that empowers Calyrex and Rayquaza is a double-edged sword. If faith can give power, then faith can also be lost, and with it, stability. The next time you stare at a legendary Pokémon in a game, remember that its power may be tethered to belief, and that belief can be shaped by stories, by memories, by warnings that go unheeded. This brings us to the ultimate question. Is the Pokémon world caught in an eternal cycle of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, of forgetting and rediscovery? In our next chapter, we will explore the eternal cycle of the Pokémon world and ask whether any of these mysteries can ever truly be solved, or whether they are simply part of the rhythm of a world that has always been and always will be, beyond our full understanding. We've spent so long tracing the threads of forgotten history, watching civilizations rise and fall, gods awaken and slumber, only to realize that the Pokémon world doesn't move in a straight line. It loops, it breathes. Every destruction, every resurrection, every sealed mystery we uncovered, they are not separate events. They are the same story, told over and over, with different faces, different names, different catastrophes. And at the center of it all, there is a pattern, a cycle so old that even the legends themselves seem unaware of its rhythm. Think about the Brass Tower. Lightning strikes, 3 unnamed Pokémon perish, and Hob-O descends to give them new life. But why those 3? Why not any of the countless others who have died in fires, in wars, in the quiet tragedies of a world that keeps spinning, because the cycle demands rebirth? Ho-Oh does not resurrect randomly. It resurrects the ones whose loss would tip the balance toward despair. And yet after that act, Ho-Oh and Lugia fled. They saw the fire not just as a natural disaster, but as a reflection of something deeper, humanity's own capacity for destruction. So they withdrew, leaving the legendary beasts to wander as reminders that even the worst endings can become new beginnings. Then cast your mind to the darkest day. 3,000 years ago, a black storm swallowed Galar. Eternatus in its Eternamax form caused mass Dynamaxing across the region. 2 Pokémons, Zacian and Zamazenta, fought alongside 2 human youths to stop it. The humans were crowned kings. The Pokémon were erased from history. Why? Because the cycle demands that the tools of salvation be forgotten once the crisis is over. To remember them will be to keep the trauma alive. So history rewrites itself. The heroic Pokémon become myths, then legends, then shadows of names that no one can quite recall. And the next time the storm comes, because it always comes, the cycle will repeat. New heroes, new gods, new amnesia. And then there is Calyrex, a being of immense power, once worshipped as the king of Galar, who brought endless harvests and tamed a wild beast as its steed. As the centuries passed, people forgot, their faith faded, and so Calyrex's power faded too, because the cycle connects belief and existence. When enough souls stop believing, a god doesn't just become weak, it becomes a memory. And memories, as we know, can be erased, but they can also be rediscovered. A single person, a single scholar, a single trainer walking through the crown tundra. The act of attention can rekindle the spark. This is the role you play. Every time you pause to wonder about the 3 Pokémon who died in the Brass Tower, you keep their story alive. Every time you ask why the Regigigas were sealed, you give voice to their ancient silence. Every time you remember that the Draconid tribe prayed to Rayquaza, and that prayer enabled the first Mega Evolution, you part of the cycle. The observer does not just witness the story, the observer sustains it. Without you, these gods would truly fade. Without you, Calyrex would become a footnote, and Zacian and Zamasenna would be nothing but statues with no names. But here's the beautiful tragedy of this cycle. It does not want to be solved. It does not want all its secrets laid bare. The mystery is part of the design. Think of Area Zero. 200 years after Heath's expedition, we still do not know why the Herba Mystica grants such power, or why it was consumed so immediately. We know that Terrapagos slumbers at the heart of the crater, and that the terrestrial phenomenon bends the rules of type and energy. But the deeper we dig, the more questions we uncover. That is not a flaw, that is the point. The world of Pokémon is built on the promise that some things will never be fully explained, so that the cycle of discovery never ends. And what of the paradox Pokémon? Creatures that look like ancient ancestors of modern species, or like forms that haven't evolved yet. They appear in Area Zero as if time itself has folded. Perhaps they are not from the past or future at all. Perhaps they are echoes of other cycles, other worlds that existed before this one. Because if the cycle is eternal, then every destruction creates a new beginning, and every beginning carries the ghosts of the old. The paradox Pokémon might be those ghosts, made solid by the strange energies of a crater that refuses to close. We've talked about sealing, about Regigigas locked away in Snowpoint Temple, Regirock Regis, Registeel sealed across Hoenn, about Spiritomb bound to an odd keystone for a crime we've never been told, and about the guardian deities of Alola, who fought Solgaleo and Lunala and were rewarded with a Z crystal. Why seal? Why reward a defeat? Because sealing is not punishment, it is preservation. The seals protect the world from forces that are too powerful to exist freely, but also preserve those forces for when they are needed again. The Regi are not prisoners, they are guardians waiting for the right moment. The Alolan deities were not enemies, they were worthy adversaries, and the gift honoured that worth. The cycle does not destroy its old gods, it puts them to sleep so they can wake when the call comes again, and the call will come. It always does. Kyogre and Groudon will fight again, Rayquaza will descend again. The darkest day, the Brass Tower, the calamities of Kalos, they are all variations on the same theme. The world is a tapestry of endless return. Every civilization that falls leaves a seed for the next. Every forgotten king is waiting for a new believer. Every sealed Pokémon is a promise of future intervention. So as we come to the close of this journey, I want you to hold on to something. The answers you are looking for may not exist in any database or ancient text. They exist in the act of looking, in the moment you choose to wonder, because wonder is the opposite of forgetting. When you wonder about the 3 Pokémon who burned, you resurrect them. When you wonder about the Draconid prayers, you join them. When you wonder about the first time Arceus was called Sinnoh, you keep that ancient name alive in the present. The beauty of this world is that it refuses to give up all its secrets. Not because it is cruel, but because the mystery is its lifeblood. A fully known world is a dead world. A world with infinite questions is one that will always have a reason to be explored, to be loved, to be protected. So the cycle continues. The gods rise and fall. Civilizations are built and buried. Legends are born, forgotten and rediscovered. And you are here, listening, remembering, breathing life into the spaces between the stories. That is your role. That is your gift. And it is enough to keep the eternal cycle turning, just a little longer, until the next dawn breaks over a world that has never truly ended. Now let the quiet take over. Let the mysteries settle into your dreams, because tomorrow the cycle will begin again, and you will be ready to wonder once more. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.